We're going to resume the meeting, so if you can please take your seats. So we have a session now on engagement, and I hope that you are going to have a lot of engagement from the room as well in our discussion opportunity at the end of the third talk. So the way that we're going to do that is we're going to have 3 short talks. And then if you can keep your questions for the speakers for the end, where we are going to have a joint session on questions for all of the speakers. I'm going to ask them to come back into the stage and then get the room open for questions. So with that, it is my pleasure to introduce the work of Dr. Maria Flávia Gazinelli, who is from the Universidade Federal of Minas Gerais, together with Dr. Andrea Correia Gazinelli, who is going to be our speaker today. They're going to be talking about the work that they did on public engagement here in Brazil. Dr. Andrea Correia Gazinelli has a Master Science of the University of Maryland and a PhD in Nursing at the University of São Paulo. She's a Emeritus Professor of the School of Nursing of the Universidade Federal of Minas Gerais and a Visitor Research at the CDC at Atlanta in the US. Both of them have great experience in public health, health education, and community engagement. I'm sure that you are going to enjoy this talk. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. I would like to thank you for inviting me to make this presentation this afternoon on engagement. My presentation today is about engagement in control human infection studies in Brazil, and I will also I will present what we have done so far related specifically to our study of KIM with hookworm. Well, public engagement is an ethical requirement for clinical research, especially when the research is complex, unfamiliar, and controversial like KIM studies. Our KIM study with hookworm is one of the first studies in Brazil, and it's not implemented yet. But before we started, we decided to explore the different public perceptions on the acceptability of our KIM study, as done by other countries such as India, Kenya, and Malawi have done. This data will allow us to confront distinct perceptions and is essential to avoid polarized positions about the study, building in ideological attitudes and dogmatic principles instead of scientific and ethical ones. To gather data on public perceptions, we first analyzed documents from local committees or local ethical committees and the Brazilian Research Ethics Committees called CONEP, related to our KIM study with hookworm. And we also interviewed different groups of people about KIM studies in general. We interviewed 3 groups of individuals in a total of 146 participants. The first group, we had the representatives of a hookworm endemic community and participants in other clinical trials. Second, we have members of research ethics committees in Brazil and the Brazilian Research Ethics Committee, the CONEP. And the third group, researchers and professionals in the biological and medical science. Our data show that, in general, participants responded positively to the development of this type of study in Brazil. They all agreed that KIM studies are important because accelerate vaccine development at a lower cost compared to conventional clinical trials. It help the country's scientific and technological development and help accelerate solutions for the control of important infectious disease. They also agreed that KIM studies are acceptable and can be developed in Brazil because we have here advanced research centers, safety clinical and regulatory guidelines, and specialists with expertise. But they also expressed concerns. All participants think that this type of study may bring fear and resistance because it's new and unknown, fear of being infected, but this fear can be reduced if there is an effective treatment for the disease in case this happens. And it also may be difficult to find volunteers. Researchers, professionals from biomedical areas, and members of ethics committees in CONEP, specifically this group expresses more concerns. Difficulty in engaging different sectors of society, difficulty in participants' understanding due to the socially vulnerable context, which may compromise autonomous decision to participate, and uncertainty about the study's safety and unanticipated risks. Specifically related to our KIM studies with hookworm, members of the CONEP and other ethics committees, they said that benefits do not outweigh the risks of hookworm infection, as this is a disease easily treated and prevented with safe water and sanitation. Well, based on these findings, we summarize that we consider important when planning our engagement process. Study comprehension and engagement of stakeholders, public, and potential participants are fundamental. When evaluating risk-benefit, people tend to seek support in common sense beliefs and notions that end up operating as epistemological obstacles to scientific knowledge about a study. Therefore, it's important to enhance comprehension and to break up dogmatic and ideological arguments. Well, but the main question is, how do we enhance comprehension? And how do we break up dogmatic and ideological arguments? This is the difficult part. We think that through education and engagement, we can do that. Most of our findings are shared in the literature, but what is still missing is there's a little emphasis on appropriate approaches for comprehension and for engagement in research. So the question we need to ask ourselves is, that we asked ourselves in this study, with whom we engage and how we engage. Well, we did the engagement process, decided to engage with the stakeholders, the public, and the participants, a community of an endemic area. Well, first of all, we used an approach that considers comprehension as a process of producing meaningful information supported by their reality. We believe that comprehension does not happen through simple transfer of information. It's more than that. And engagement as a dialogue and deliberation on research between scientists, interested groups, and the public. It must involve symmetry in knowledge and power relations between these groups, based on the recognition of difference between ways of thinking, values, expectations, and objectives. Well, in relation to the stakeholders, the process of engagement, it lasting for 4 years approximately, that we did the discussions and reflection with these 4 groups here. We included these representatives of endemic community that are potential volunteers in the future. We held meetings, focus groups, discussions, and educational intervention using figures, demonstrations, storytelling, and discussions between community and a multidisciplinary group of specialists. We use data from these meetings to show CONEP that individuals that live in social vulnerability can understand the study. That's something that CONEP asked us in this process of approving our project, is that we could show them that vulnerable people could understand this type of study. The second group was members of the Ethics Committee and CONEP. We held several group discussions and meetings, trying to enhance comprehension and to break up dogmatic and ideological arguments that they have and they think in our study. Unfortunately, we have not succeeded yet. Researchers and biomedical professionals. This is about organization and participation in conferences, workshops like this one that usually include final products. That's what we're hoping for, such as a report, a scientific paper, or a framework, for example. And we also, bioethicists, we made some group discussions and inclusion as members of our research group that could strengthen our group and the project of Kim for mainly to CONEP. In relation to the public, we produced theses, doctoral theses. We presented our work in Congress and meetings and workshops and published scientific papers related to the subject. And in the participants and community, this part is not started yet. But I would like to show you some example of strategy that we used for when we were at the endemic area to the educational intervention for CONEP, and also some strategies that we use in clinical trials in the same area, the same endemic area, but in previous projects. The engagement process with the community, the participants usually start before they sign the consent form. We used it, and it goes through all the duration of the project. We use different tools, such as storytelling, the arpileiras that swim in groups, videos, ebooks, and other, always bringing to light their reality and living experiences. We usually try to make a connection of life events and participation in research. We think that this strategy favors comprehension and engagement, thus increasing participation, and also favors an autonomous decision to participate and also adherence to the study. We had other projects that we made process of engagement, and it was a challenge for us we work with children and adolescents, because we only have a 3% that did not continue in the project, but during 3 years we had almost everybody, and I think this was due to the strategies we used for engagement. Well, I would like to thank you, Dr. Elton and Rodrigo Correia Oliveira, that helped us at the beginning of this project. Ana Carolina Terzian, Cássia, Jaqueline, and Simone. I'd like to show you here, to finish my presentation, I'd show you, this is a photo that represents an art of arpileiras. Participants of one of our vaccine trials in Americaninhas that made this work. And we thought that we worked through sewing, they could express themselves and tell us what the voices sometimes cannot say anything. This arpileiras came from Chile, when the people used, in the revolution, they used to talk to others and to the public through this kind of work. And I think this represents a lot what we think and what we plan to do when we work with the participants in the endemic area. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. That was really, very exciting and engaging. So we're going to move now to the next speaker and save your questions for the end. So would you like to call Dr. Noni Mumba, who holds a degree of a Master's of Arts degree in Development Communication and has led for more than 10 years community engagement for global health research. Her expertise is very broad in terms of public interest, including local and national Kenyan policymakers, and she's also a member of the Global Health Bioethics Network. Thank you so much, Noni.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate being invited to come and speak about our community and public engagement. I've changed, I'm going to change the order of my presentation a little bit. You realize we don't have a lot of time. So what I'm going to do is I'll quickly skip over all my presentations and go to a video. The video, I saw our time is about 10 minutes. The video is 8 minutes long, and I think that's more important than me yapping at you. And everybody is looking tired, and they want to really finish and go. So this video that you're going to see, so first of all, I'm not a doctor yet. Underline yet. Yes, almost there. So, so the video that I'm going to show is a group of community members that we consulted for a planned Shigella chimps study. And this was after we've been doing malaria studies, and Shigella was going to be a little bit different. And so we, together with the principal investigators and obviously the funders, Wellcome Trust, they wanted to hear from community members whether such a study would be acceptable. So I'll play. I was going the wrong way. If you could hit, I think, play so that it plays. I don't know whether I can do that from here. So just watch the video, and then I'll have a bit of a conclusion.
Mimi ninavyoona kwa maoni yangu utakubalika sababu ya kuwa umesumbua watoto wengi hiyo chini ya miaka 5, umewasumbua watoto wengi sana mpaka watoto wengine kufariki. So watu wakijua kutakuwa na manufaa baadaye, sidhani kama watakataa kushiriki.
Mimi naona watakataa kwa sababu wanajua ugonjwa wa kuharisha si mchezo. Alafu unafanya kuwekwa kunywesha. Sasa ukinywesha basi utachafua kila kitu kwa tumbo. Na ukianza kuhara basi waweza kuhara mpaka ukapoteza nguvu na ukapoteza maisha. Sasa atakuwa na dukuduku. Kwa hawa naona anataka tupunguze, maana tumekuwa wengi. Sasa anataka kuleta mambo yao. Wengi watakataa, mimi kwa yao.
Yule anayeeleza ni nani? Yule anayekuja kunieleza mimi ndio nishiriki hapo ni nani? Kwa sababu hii jamii yetu iko complicated. Complicated kiasi kwamba naweza amini sana mtu mimi ninayemjua kuliko mtu mgeni tu from nowhere aje ati sijui mzungu anakuja tu ananieleza vitu vyake.
Wale washiriki ambao watakuwa wanashiriki katika hiyo nini, je, watakuwa na specialist wale madaktari ama ni madaktari hawa umma wenye tumezoea hospitali yetu wanakuwa? Kwa sababu hii dukuduku ya madaktari kama nilivyosema P8, unaweza sema wadunga kininio ama wanywa ile kirusi ya ninio ya Shigella. Baibala umepewa kirusi ya ninio ya corona.
Okay.
Sasa hiyo negligence ya madaktari ndio inaleta shauku hii. Kwa sababu kumekuwa na hizo ninio sana kwa hospitali zetu.
Hao wanajamii wakisikia kuhusu utafiti, kwa kuwa mtu atachukuliwa mtu mzima apelekwe hospitali akaiko huko kwa siku 15, watakuwa na wasiwasi, watafikiri pengine wanataka kuambukizwa corona. Kwa sababu ukiangalia corona, mtu anaitwa quarantine kama ameathirika na corona. Sasa itafanya watu wengi watakuwa na ile hofu, lakini tuseme wale watafiti ambao watafanya wale watatafiti wale watu waende huko nyanjani kwa yule mtu ambaye atatafitiwa. Sasa waende wakaeleze, waelimishe zaidi, ndipo hawatakuwa na hofu.
Mtu anaweza kuchukuliwa na afya zake, apelekwa kwa utafiti. Ule muda wa utafiti ukiendelea, hiyo Mungu alikuwa amepangia huyu mtu atapumzikia wapi, aende. Unajua akienda, familia itabaki ikisema ni ule utafiti aliofanyika ndio imefanya kufe.
Tukija kwa sala kama hili, hivi karibuni kama mlisikia habari za COVID-19 ya kwamba kule chini walikuwa wanatoa na dunga bomba ya nyuma ili kutolewa kupimwa kupitia kwa sehemu ya nyuma. Sasa mtu akisikia sasa ilikuwa ni habari za kunywa vimelea, mama ashakubali. Piwani mke wangu amekubali kwamba mume P8 niende kule ikakuwa admitted ninywe vimelea. Sasa anaanza kusikia zile njia zingine zinazofanyika. Sasa kuna kuchukuliwa kwa zile sampuli ya kinyesi. Nafikiri sasa hapa kutaanza kuingia tetesi nyingi sana, mazungumzo mengi tena katika jamii. Sasa huu ndio ule ushoga ambao tumeongelea, ule usemi ambao tumeongelea. Ama hii ni corona kabisa, kwa sababu sasa wameanza kufikia wapi? Kuchukua choo.
Mbali na utafiti, watu washashikwa na ugonjwa wa kuharisha, na njia nyingi inayotumika ni choo. Sidhani kama kuna mtu ambaye hajaenda hospitali akaambiwa alete choo. Na pia kulingana na P8 anavyosema, si kuwa yule daktari ndo anakuja na kutoa choo. Labda hiyo ndio umeelewa, sababu hapo labda ndio utasema hiyo kuwa wamesikia corona sijui siku hizi inapimwa na nini, mtu atashuku. Ni choo unaenda kutoa wewe mwenyewe, ukifika tu wewe unapeleka tu ile sample.
At least kuwe na family member mmoja ambaye atakuwa anaweza mvisit. Because mumesema hata yule anayemhudumia pale ndani kama ni daktari ama ni nani, kuna vile anavaa vitu vya kujikinga ili asimwambukize. So huyu wa family member pia anaweza tumia vitu vile vya kujikinga, but hata yule ambaye anafanywa huo utafiti atafeel yuko na mtu wa nyumbani ambaye yuko karibu na yuko responsible, anakuja akimtembelea na kumjulia hali.
Hata sindano kama ni ile ya kuweka maji iko kwa mkono, kama nikirudi kule kwangu, kama ni kupika chapati na maharage, hata zile 15 zikiisha, hata nikirudi nyumbani tena itabidi nijiongezee mimi mwenyewe, kwa sababu kama ni mkono bado huko ile laini imetolewa ndio nikatoka, halafu kuna alama ama kuna kidonda kidogo. Na zile sindano nyingine kama za mahali popote lazima niwe nina maumivu kidogo katika mwili.
Kutoka kwa ule utafiti, alienda kwa utafiti akiwa ni mzima na afya zake kamili, lakini akitoka hapo mwili wake utakuwa umepungua, pengine kinga atakuwa ni mdhaifu kiasi kwa muda, ndio arudi katika hali yake ya kawaida. Sasa kwenye ule muda ambao atakuwa ametoka hapo, atakuwa hawezi kufanya kazi kwa hata kwa wiki.
Kwa kiwango kile cha binadamu kwamba kama lazima afanywe compensation, nafikiri angelifanywa kwanza. Ile compensation ingelikuwa 1000 kwa siku, 1000 kwa siku, halafu tuongeze risk allowance, kwa sababu hata yule anayefanya huko naye mwalimu yuko kule na risk allowance, ambayo yuko kule anachimba mtaro yeye hana risk allowance kwa sababu hakuna mtu aliyemwajiri. Lakini hapa ninaingia kwa utafiti ambao na risk.
Nishaelezwa na wakielewa hawatakuwa na ugumu kukubali kutolewa ile damu, maana watakuwa washapata maelezo kabla hawajaanza ile hatua ya kutolewa ile damu.
Maoni yangu nilikuwa napendekeza ingetumika ile Mombasa Hospital. Mombasa Hospital, okay, matibabu kimtazamo wangu mimi huwa na yani sijajipa imani katika hospitali za private za public. Ndio maana nikarudi katika ile swala langu la kusema hawa madaktari wetu wa afya wa umma ni watu ambao wako na negligence nyingi sana. Kwa hivyo ikiwa iko kwenye mazingira ya ya kituo cha afya cha public, huenda huo kutakuwa na neno nyingi sana.
Kwanza either Mombasa Hospital ama Aga Khan. Kwa sababu utapata kama mahali kama Aga Khan kuna zile ward za wagonjwa wote. Kuna zingine zinakuanga ni semi private na kuna zile private wards. So nikiangalia huu utafiti utakuwa unafanywa, hawa watu watakuwa hatakikani kuwa karibu na watu wengine wasiwaambukize. Na ukifuatilia mwelekezo wa Aga Khan utapata kama ni semi private utapata labda watu wawili. Kama ni private wards kila mtu anakaa peke yake, uko na choo yako na unasaviwa from the room.
Hapa tulikuwa tumeongea swala la kwamba watu wasiwe mbali na nyumbani kwao. Kwa hivyo mimi napendelea hapa Kilifi. Alafu ulikuwa napendelea mahali gani? Hapa hospitali kuna hizi hapa mahali kwa COVID-19 hapa. Si hakuna wagonjwa. Kama hakuna wagonjwa, mimi naona hata isingekuwa yani kutafuta mahali kwingine mbali na hapo nini ambapo kafanywa huo utafiti Cambridge.
Okay, so this is work that is happening within a broader engagement strategy. So as a Cambridge Wellcome Trust, a couple of you will already know that we have been engaging communities within our health and demographic surveillance system area since 2005. So we have more than a decade of experience of engaging populations in this specific geographical area, and that is how we have organized our engagement. And we have a variety of approaches that we use. At the top, there is a community advisory board. Those are the Cambridge community representatives that you've just seen on the film, sharing their views about the Shigella, the planned Shigella. You will have noticed that towards the end, they're talking about which hospitals. So for the malaria challenge work that we have been doing, the inpatient facility that has been used has been a public university, guest house within a public university. But for Shigella, the inpatient facility is going to be a hospital. And so the community representatives, were keen not to have their family members too far. So I'll skip right to the end, and then I'll be able to answer questions. So I think it's really important to highlight that, just as has been said by my colleague earlier, that it's really important to begin to think about engagement right from conception. So for the Shigella piece of work, for example, before even the protocol was written, when the researcher still had a sort of like a draft protocol that needed to be completed, we did this piece of work, which then went into informing the protocol, and the protocol is currently at our regulatory body, PPB, that's Pharmacies and Poisons Board. It has already been approved by the Ethics Review Committee. And also just to highlight that, yes, you will do engagement. It shouldn't be seen as a way of having a smooth ride, or if I can call it that way. There will still be misconceptions and misunderstandings drawn from different, because these are community members that are not living in a bubble. They're listening to news, they have social media and so on and so forth. So once in a while, they will get information that will, make them perhaps change their minds about the work that we are doing. So as a research institute, we've had our share of, we have trust one day with the community, the next day we don't, because something has happened and we have to work hard again to get back that trust. Flexibility is needed. So for this study, the investigator, Professor Melissa, was intending to take the study to Mombasa, a hospital known as Premier, and that changed to Kilifi based on some of the comments that came from the participants. And really, really, this is something that I have to really stress, the need for dedicated staff to be able to support in planning and implementation of engagement activities is really, really key for the success of research work. So I'll stop there, and then I'll take questions.
Thank you so much, Inoni. That was brilliant. We're going to hold the questions to the end. So we're going now from Kenya to Uganda with Dr. Moses Ejeza. So Dr. Moses is from the Uganda VRI. He's a research fellow, also at the London School of Tropical Medicine and Hygiene, and honorary senior research officer at the Uganda Virus Research Institute. So it's a pleasure to have you here to talk about your work on schistosomiasis. Thank you.
Thank you for the introduction. So continuing from yesterday, I'm going to talk to you about our engagement activities. So this was the roadmap I talked to you about yesterday, and the focus today is on the engagement. So for engagement, working with our collaborator in the Netherlands, Dr. Meta Rostenberg, we applied for funding from the HICVAC, which we got. And the aim of that work was to prepare for these studies in Uganda. So first of all, we wanted to do engagement. And the first aim of that was to develop materials. So if you're going to engage people, you need to have materials to engage them with. So we wanted to work with the communities to develop these, and then also develop and pilot information and consent forms. After that, once you have these two materials, wanted to assess if people understand what these materials are all about, and then also their attitudes. And finally, is it feasible to do these studies in Uganda, was the question. So for that, we had two settings I talked to you about. The first setting was the university community. So in university community, it's within, if this is Lake Victoria, our institute is here. In the university community, they have minimal prior exposure to water with schistosomes. They're well educated, of course. But unlike what we had received recommendations from Kenya about using university students, who are, if they're undergraduate, they have still dependent on their parents and need consent, we thought we should look at people within this community that are independent. That meant working with administrators, lecturers, and postgraduate students. And the other community is the high transmission community. So here we have intense prior exposure, and people are either directly or indirectly exposed. So those are the two communities, and we're focusing on people between 18 to 50 years. So to do this, we approach the community. You go through their leaders and get permission. After that, you get consent from the participants. And then those two communities, the two settings, we broke them into consultative group and the test group. So let's think about the consultative group. So we'll pick, say, 10 people, present the materials we have developed as a group, and then conduct more informed consent on those, as well as test comprehension. Then give them 1 week and look at whether we assess if they understood the materials, and then finally explore if it is feasible to work with them. And then once the information was collected, we refined the materials that we had developed with the information we have from these communities, and then we'll then bring the test group. So the test group is within the same community, but it's another lot of people who are now working on refined materials. And from that, we basically repeat the whole process with 1 week interval to allow them interact with their close relatives. So once we had all that done, we finalized the materials and submitted those alongside the protocol. So of course, for all studies, as you've been hearing, we went through the approvals, peer review, ethical approval, as well as regulatory. For regulatory, there's a national guideline on how to engage communities. So how did we create the materials? The materials, because they're on controlled human infection model, most of the pages were on the model. So, but we start out from the start. We start with schistosomiasis, that's about 2 pages, vaccines 1 page, and then the remaining 7 are on the model. So the process, how is the dose acquired, how can we use the challenge model to test a vaccine, what are the risks, symptoms, and what is expected of participants, and what are the benefits of participation. So from that, when it came to comprehension, we found, because these are the communities the ministry has engaged with over and over, they are very conversant with bilharzia. So in the communities, we talk about bilharzia, not schistosomiasis. So they are conversant with bilharzia and vaccines. But when it came to controlled human infection model, you can guess what happened. They had never heard of it, considering this is the very first model in the country, Uganda. So this was they never heard of it. But once we went through the material and tested comprehension after, they were able to understand everything, most of the things about the model. So when it came to benefit, so most of them thought it is beneficial because this would give us a vaccine that they need so that they could continue with their activities. So here one of them said, of course, by participating, you're helping the entire society. And then others, so when you give compensation and for time, some perceive that as a benefit, which is something we had to clarify, because that is something that may, in a way, seem to make people join the study rather than join it voluntarily. So that's the monetary benefit. Yet, in research, this should be seen as compensation of time. So also looking at benefit, so we talked about, we discussed with them, can we compensate for your transport and time? And they were happy with that. But then the question was, how much would be adequate for you? But depending on where you are, in either the fishing community or the university, the amount varied from $3 to others are talking about $32 as well as $40. So we had that whole range of money, which we had to talk to the regulators about, and they concluded we should concentrate on $40 for every visit they come to the challenge study. And then there was a problem of adverse effects. So adverse effects. So for this, it's not necessarily the adverse effects of being in a challenge model, but we're more worried about the treatment, because these communities are familiar with being treated with praziquantel. If you have tested that drug, it's rather big, and if you have a high dose of infection, your reaction is actually stronger. So that was what they cited as the adverse event, but we had to clarify it isn't to do with the challenge model, because remember, in the challenge model, the dose is low and there are no eggs, so we wouldn't expect to have that effect I've described. But then one participant took comfort in the fact that this has been done elsewhere, so we talked to them about the model in the Netherlands, so they were happy with that. Willingness to participate, so people there were mixed feelings about participation, but then they said they would only join if they understood the whole study and the consulting process. And then for students in the university, they were more concerned about the timing of the study, because in university you have exams and the like, so you have to time the study very well. Finally, others thought it's very important to have their relatives involved or close family members, and that's the week we gave between the consultative time we gave them. Finally, from what we noticed, people are willing to take part. And as a matter of fact, people had already been recruited to take up the study. So now what came back to us is to have the model work, which I described to you is still having some challenges. Now we are continuing to, so that was the engagement we had in the community 2019, but we keep continuing to engage with them as we are handling the challenges we are facing, producing the challenge material. For instance, here, we went and met the administration of the university and then talked to the student guild. So by talking to the student guild, they would help us if there's any misinformation. This is the group that would help us with the students. And then interacting with the RECs. The first time personally I saw this interaction about chi models was in 2018. So this was the annual National REC conference. So all RECs in the country, about 34 of them, were in this meeting. And the keynote speech was on challenge models, which was nice. And this is the first time they got a feel of it and stayed in their mind. And then when we went in, they knew what we were talking about. So that was the first time with the REC. And then working with colleagues at the university, Makerere University, there was a training for RECs. on complex, what they called emerging and complex study designs. So here you have up to 11 designs. And number 7 is controlled manufacturing models. So this gave me an opportunity and our team to go talk to the different tracks about challenge models. So, and then within those models, I would talk about the key aspects of the model, where to focus if they are reviewing these models, and then it helped us also talk about our model for schistosomiasis in the process. And then we still continue to engage opinion leaders. For example, at the UVRI, we have the Community Advisory Board, which is selected from the different local communities we work in, and this is very vital. For us, it helps the researchers understand what is happening in the community, as well as the community members can use this to voice their concerns. And then the policymakers, we have spent a lot of time talking to different leaders. For example, the municipal, talked to the chairperson of the Parliamentary Committee on Health, and been to the ministry through the NTD Secretariat to discuss these studies. And then according to the guidelines I showed you earlier, community engagement is an ongoing process. So it's from inception to dissemination of findings and post-research activities. So we have continued to do that. For instance, once we engage with the community in the university, we were invited to discuss these findings at their first annual conference, which I thought was a good thing. And then we also set up the first symposium the start of last year on schistosomiasis. It's within this symposium that we talked about controlled manufacturing models. And then we have been able to give other talks internationally. For example, the Dutch Society of Parasitology, the British Society of Parasitology, and this premium conference on helminths. For those working on helminths, this is where most of the helminths is discussed in Hydra. It's an island in Greece. A lot of sunshine. Finally, let me thank Wellcome Trust and then HICVAC.
Thank you, Moses. If you can just get a seat. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Can I call back Noni and Andrea? Maybe Flavia, if you want to join us as well, please. We're going to have time now for questions and discussions. And whilst we're waiting for our panelists to come, I'm going to start by asking a question about north, south learnings. Because I think one of the important aspects that this panel really highlights to us is that we have just heard from examples all about the Global South and public engagement. And I wonder from the panelists, and that's a question for you all, do you think that for all of you, do you think that, what we have just heard from Uganda and Kenya is more relevant potentially to the context of Brazil than would be, university students in Oxford or in Liverpool, or actually every single country, doesn't matter where we're talking about, and maybe that's about Uganda versus Kenya, is a very different context, and maybe even within countries, you have to face different context for the public engagement. Big question, just please fire away. Noni, if you want to start.
Thank you. I hope I've understood your question. So I think the concept of community engagement, community public engagement, patient public involvement, there's very many different terminologies of stakeholder engagement. The concept is generally the same. And the variations would be in the, as you say, the context in terms of the people, the culture, the kind of things that are appropriate and work. So for example, just even within Kenya itself, the kind of community engagement we may do in Kilifi, which is mostly a rural town or a rural county, is probably not the same that we'll do in Nairobi, which is metropolitan. So there are subtle differences in the approaches that are used. There are subtle differences in the goals. What are your goals of engaging? But the concept is the same in that what we are doing is we are allowing, there was a term that was used, mutual understanding. We are allowing the scientists and the lay population to be able to interact and understand one another for the benefit of moving science forward.
Great.
Well, I agree that the concepts are, the definitions are pretty much the same. I think there is a very thin line, if difficult to see the difference between involvement, participation, or engagement, involvement, and others. But of course, the approach changed. Listening to the other two, I think it's very similar the way we approach the community, the participants in endemic areas. I think it doesn't change much. What here that we've been talking a lot in our group that we think we have more difficult is exactly because we talk about engagement, that we need to do engagement, we need to do the education, but we usually don't know exactly how we do that. And of course, it depends on the population. For example, we show here the examples we did with figures and drawings and etc. for endemic populations that, usually low literacy, it's easier. But we changed that in our project when we moved to graduate students that we had to move to change for our Kim's project. Then of course, the strategy changed, so we needed to change because it's a completely different population, and we have to do that because of culture and knowledge and the educational level, etc. But I think I saw the three of us, they're very much, I don't know if we agree, but they're very much similar, the way we are doing. I think this is only a matter of changing things for the culture, adapt the culture.
Thank you for that. So, if I understood the question, the context is very important when we are discussing engagement. Mostly, the aim we want to do these engagements is the same for all the fields. For example, in the Netherlands, they did exactly the same, wanted to know the motivation. But when it comes to our setting in Uganda, for instance, you have to think of the people you are talking to. For example, in Netherlands, if you said schistosomiasis, that's just what it is. But should you say the same thing in Ugandan setting, then it will be more difficult. Because first of all, these are fishing communities, and in fishing communities, we have people come from different places. And I was talking to Andrew Pollard earlier, that within our small, a short distance of 30 kilometers, you have about 10 tribes. And 10 tribes have different languages. And different languages mean they describe schistosomiasis differently. So now when I come as a scientist from schistosomiasis, first of all, then I break it down to bilharzia, I still have to go further to say what it is exactly. And most likely they describe it as, let's say, swollen abdomen. But remember now, that was the time when we had no treatment. Now that we have treatment, so there are no more swollen abdomens. So then what do you call it? So that context is very important, and this also ties in with the level of education. For example, when I talked about the fishing community, that's what you'd go through. But when you talk to the university, they could easily Google that, and they understand. So context is very important, but the end goal is the same.
Great. Does anybody have any questions or comment, Aldo?
Yeah, thank you for sharing with us the experience about engagement. And Noni, you have experience in engaging for two different diseases, malaria and Shigella. My question is, does it change the manner, or if you have a general formula, will work for both? And I understand there is variation of culture. If you change community, if you change population, definitely you need to change strategy. But the same strategy will also serve for different diseases, or you think you need a strategy tailored for each disease?
Thank you for that question. So it's a tricky question. you don't necessarily need different strategies for the two diseases. And there's one of the main reasons why you don't need different strategies is because you don't want to make it seem as though one disease is more serious than the other. So generally we use the same approaches. I think the only difference for us especially, I'll just use our experience. So when we were doing the malaria challenge studies, we did a very intensive engagement. We engaged our own staff. We went and did engagement at the inpatient facility, Pwani University. That's where the malaria CHIM study volunteers were going to be hosted as inpatient. So we did very, very intensive because that was the first time we were doing a CHIM within Kilifi, the rural setting. The first CHIM was in Nairobi amongst university students, well educated. And now we are bringing a study where we are going to deliberately infect healthy volunteers in a setting where we've never done that. So we did very intensive community engagement, staff engagement. Our staff are a source of information in the population, and we would not have wanted them to have questions. So we did very thorough engagement at that time. When it for Shigella, we've just now done the consultations. And when we go now into recruitment, we are going to do less intensive because we've already covered most of the main issues that would be thorny in terms of deliberately infecting. So the approaches are the same. It's just that when we were starting off, the engagement was more intensive. But we would use the same systems of going out into the community and holding large community meetings, what we call community barazas. These are meetings where you convene community members, a local chief convenes community members, and the scientists go and they talk about their study directly with communities, and they get to us. So those are the same approaches we would use.
Thank you. I have another question. Can I?
Yeah, then yeah, go ahead.
One thing that I noticed both in Uganda and in Kenya is that you have national guidelines for CHIM or CHIM engagement. And I found that fantastic. And my question is, how could you engage the stakeholders at the point they think we need a national guideline for this? So I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Thank you. So when you saw the national guidelines, for example, ones of community engagement, so these are broad. They cover all sorts of studies, including trials. They're not specific to controlled manufacturing models, and they're relatively new. So you can see for engagement is 2022, and the one for the new, I think the oldest of them all is 2014. But you can imagine we were doing research before that. So, so at the time before 2014, I would imagine we were relying on what is out there, for example, from the US, anything that is available that has already been set out, the GCP, for example, that is a good guideline we were following. But now as a country, once we presented these studies, the controlled manufacturing models, then the question was, do we have national guidelines? And then that's how they created those. We also, I showed you yesterday about the animal guidelines. We didn't have that. Once we had, I remember the chairman of that committee, I was with him in Tunisia, learning about animal research. And having been engaged there, they came back and set those up again. So it is more like, once they see what is missing, a gap, and then they fill that. And that is very helpful for future studies.
So I must admit that Uganda beat us to setting up a community engagement national guideline, and I saw it, and I felt very jealous. So we don't have guidelines for community engagement for our ethics committees. They are learning, from us. So a lot of the things that we have done in Kilifi, just as what Prima said, especially even for CHIM studies. So our national ethics committees are actually learning from us as a center. I don't know whether I'm allowed to say that. But anyway, they're learning. they're doing a lot of learning from us because we started through funding from Welcome. We started doing community engagement way back when even people didn't know and understand what community engagement is all about. So right now is when now people are beginning to think about you must have. So our protocol templates, for example, as a research institute, they have a section under ethical considerations where the investigator must outline, what engagement are they planning. That's a must. We are part of the review panel as an engagement team. We review all protocols that are going before they go to the national ethics. And if an investigator has not outlined engagement, we put comments on the side and say, you have not included engagement, think about this, this, and that. And basically now the national ethics committees are now beginning to pick that up. And if people haven't mentioned engagement in their protocols, then those comments come back from the ethics. But we don't have a guideline as yet for community engagement. And even for CHIM, I think now is when we are beginning to think about developing one.
Thank you. Ben?
Yeah, thank you. So there's an expanding literature on community engagement from a variety of contexts. Like Primus showed a kind of plethora of publications on some of the engagement work that's been done. And obviously context is massively important, but has there been reviews or qualitative evidence syntheses where we kind of synthesize findings from some of these studies where there may be shared learnings between contexts? Obviously we need to focus on the context, but for somebody starting out in a new CHIM, is there shared concerns that communities need to be, that as a generality people need to consider? Is that work being done to look at synthesized information?
Anyone? So Ben basically asked if there is within the literature any summary of the evidence of the learnings and challenges on community engagement more generally and broadly, or anybody that's going to come into the field now and wants to do some community engagement in the context of CHIM, could you go and read up?
You can start and then I'll... You can start and then I'll respond.
Let's see if I understand correctly. Well, we have as I see, I think we don't need to do this. We can go to previous knowledge that we have in the literature. But I think what is missing now, it's exactly, we talk about a lot about engagement, but exactly how we do that, what concepts, and based in what concept we are going to engage and make people to comprehend exactly what we are doing. I think that's what we're missing, and some literature in that, and probably that's I think we lack. I don't know if I answer correctly, to tell you the truth.
On the lines, more or less. Noni?
So I think for us who are funded by Welcome, we get a lot of information about what is happening. And so I'm aware of some work that Welcome commissioned a couple of people to do, which was sort of like a synthesis of community engagement across different countries, continents, and they tried to do across different types of studies, but they only found quite a lot of rich literature in malaria, engagement for malaria studies, and not for other types of studies. So this is work that was done between, I think, around 2018, 2019, all the way to around 2023, and there are some publications that have been written up about that piece of work. It's called Real, I don't know how to say it. So there's Real 1 and there's Real 2 that Welcome has just funded again, the same group of people. This is Dr. Bipin Adhikari of, is he from Thailand or from Vietnam? I think Thailand or Vietnam. Professor Sassi Molyneux from Oxford, a consultant known as Robin, who has done a lot of consultancies with Wellcome. So they've done this piece of work. They are papers. I'll try to Google them and send to you or to Anna. Oh, yes, thank you. Rescue me.
Yeah, no, as I mentioned earlier, we've done a scoping review of the engagement about controlled human infection studies. That's in the back of the guidance, and a scoping review of the social science studies on controlled human infection studies, which was actually one of the authors is primus of that review. But actually that ends, I guess, when did we finish that? 2021 or... Yeah, so... But there is, it has been done, and it's specific to human challenge studies models. So it is out there, but it could do with an update, and actually it'd be good to link that with the Wellcome work.
Yeah,
so.
Yeah.
That's excellent, thank you. Do you have any more questions? Here for Dave, yeah, thank you.
And just thank you very much for all the presentations, really excellent. I'm just curious how all of you have consulted or interviewed, received feedback from IRBs, and I'm wondering, how did you select or how did you get the people who you interviewed, and is there a potential for selection bias in some of the feedback and thoughts and feelings from IRB members related to CHIMS that might have come into play? Like, were they volunteers, or did you specifically target individual members that you wanted feedback from? Just what was the process for getting the consultation with the IRB members or the ethics committee members?
So I'll defer the actual interviews to Primus, but for the engagement meeting, so we've had engagement meetings where a couple of the national REC members as well as the regulators came to Kilifi, and we had a meeting for a couple of the CHIM studies, and that's by invitation, and they just come. But for specifically for the social science studies, in terms of how the selection was done, I think Primus would be the best to respond to that.
And whilst we're waiting for Primus, don't you? Yeah.
Yes, to say about that is that for the perceptions that we collect, we have the documents is specifically from our CHIM study, but for the perceptions, we selected from other outside from Minas Gerais. One indicating the other because you knew someone and then indicated. I think that there is a potential. There is probably, it could be some bias, but usually, but I think that usually we got very interesting perceptions in a way that what was interesting is that what we got from the perception, it does not reflect exactly what it got from the documents. Because usually they felt positive about the study. But when we got the documents from our study specifically, this is completely different.
Okay, yeah, so just to talk a bit, I think it's part of our protocol where the research ethics committee members and regulators are part of one of the group of participants, and the approach we used was we reached out to the administrators of the committee, and then they sent out the request to their members, and those who are interested, they reach out to me. Then I pick it up with them. Like, I've had interviews with ethics committee members in Kenya and in Oxford, and these are committees that have reviewed CHIMs that have been done in Kenya, so at least they have some familiarity with with that. So yeah, so they reach out, and those who are interested, they reach out to me. Yeah.
Thank you. Can I just ask one more question while you guys are thinking about your next ones? Have any of you done any research or engagement asking participants why they have taken part in a CHIM studies in your centers?
Yes. So for our engagement with the communities, we wanted to exactly know why they're taking part, and mostly it was to do with, it came through the benefit angle. But most of them, because of the kind of work we do with them, we introduce what we do, why we do what we do, and then when it came to them, they were mostly for example, schistosomiasis. They know it's a problem in their community, and they were actually very happy to do it for the societal good, mostly. But obviously, some were very frank to say they are in for the monetary benefit.
Of course.
Because, like I told you earlier, as much as we are compensating for their time, to someone that is a benefit.
Of course.
Yeah, because you would imagine some of them don't actually earn this kind of, if you gave them, for example, we talked about $40 every visit. $40 translates to 150,000. I think in the country, the minimum wage is about 230,000. So you can see that that's almost some good amount of money. So someone may join to do this study knowing that it's going to benefit at a weekly basis. But that's not the intention of this study. The intention is to do a societal good, and we tend to bring that to the fore every time we're engaging them.
Thank you.
From other clinical trials that we have, and we asked them, the same population that we work, that I show in my presentation, what they say is that they do for altruism, but mostly because we don't get money compensation here in Brazil, but most of them do because they receive medical care, health care attention. I think that's the most important part for them. Not only specific from our project, but we do this health attention from everything in general. So I think it's like they feel, because it's so difficult for them sometimes in where they live, that when we get there with a health team, a health group, they feel like they have more chance to solve their health problems. I think that basically this is what they like most.
This has been our experience when we transferred the model from Liverpool to Malawi as well, where access to medical health was a huge incentive in Malawi. Whilst in Liverpool, a lot of the medical students really are keen for the financial benefit. And in the same model for pneumococcus, if you go to the older adults in Liverpool, they actually are really interested in benefiting the health of kids. Yeah. So when you tell them that you are looking into a vaccine that is going to improve the health of babies, that's when they actually want to take part. So it's a very interesting difference, and that's what I asked the question in your context. If you have
sometimes when we make the examinations, we find out other things, other health problems, and then we have they feel like more. It's good for them to be attended, like receiving this kind of care.
Good. Any last comment? Yeah.
Pretty much the same. I think the only thing which can be a little bit different, and maybe they may have experienced it amongst just a few of our participants. Some of them said it's an opportunity to be away from home.
Oh, yeah.
And in our population, sometimes people don't have 3 square meals a day, a nice bed, hot shower, those kinds of things. So that was one other motivation, being away from home and the home troubles
in a facility
for a while.
Good. One last one there, yeah?
About the beginning, the study, how to manage the misinformation and fake news in the community, and how to manage bad side effects if they happen after the study, what to do with the community engagement.
Anybody want to have a go at this?
How do we deal with fake news?
Yes, right at the beginning, when you come with the engagement, how do you then deal with potentially misinformation, fake news?
Well, let me see. Usually, we have to do. Usually, we do several group meetings, and we talk to people there. We have to. Usually, we're talking about that because sometimes they get a lot of misinformation about mainly because this kind of project. And what we do, we gather a group of people, and this group of people, it's like we work together, and then we spread that they go and they get another group, another people, and more and more until we see that we can break this chain of misunderstanding. But we have to be really transparent and talk very clearly to them so they can understand better. And we need to usually we make a lot of meetings and things and different activities with the community as a whole so that we can avoid this kind of thing. That's usually what we do.
Yes, so this is becoming a problem increasingly with social media, but for the communities we are dealing with, say the fishing community, I don't think it's yet a problem via social media, but obviously the communities talk to one another. And that's where our community advisory board members come in. So these are people from the same communities. So those would help explain the studies because we have explained to them what the studies are all about. That's the first remedy. The other remedy is if it is really a problem that is detrimental, most likely the community will run to their local council person, the chairperson, LC1, as our system is set up. So how do we mitigate that? So when we do have these studies in these communities, we do engage with the LC1. So this is the number one in that hierarchy that needs to know about the study. So should they come to him or her, then he would explain. That's number two. Then we also have generally within the Ministry of Health, we have the village health teams. So these are well-trained staff, well-trained health officials who are within the community, and they help with systems like vaccination and the like. So we work with those as well when we are going to do the controlled human infection model. And these are tied into the health center for the local health centers. So the whole system is geared to eliminate that kind of misinformation. But then if we were to use, if now thinking about the university community, and now we have the social media, so something we have to think about how to handle. But we are doing all the best. We're also on social media as well. Once we have that information moving out, we're also putting in the right information within the same social media to counter that. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
So in Kilifi, we have 2 helplines. And these are helpline numbers, mobile telephone numbers that community members can call without a cost to them. And so we normally distribute those. We inform community members when we go for engagement activities. If there's anything that's happening in the community, they can call us and let us know. So that's one way that we get to know if there's any fake news circulating. The other one is a WhatsApp group. So through our community advisory board members, those that have smartphones, we've set up a WhatsApp group. And this happened from COVID to date. And what happens on that WhatsApp group is if a community advisory board member that is out there in the community comes across some information that maybe they may not know whether it's true or not true, but they post it on the WhatsApp group, and then we pick it up as an engagement team, and then we discuss it if it is to do with either if it is a challenge study or any other study that we are implementing. We discuss the response together with the concerned investigator for the specific study. So we develop key messages, and we then post those key messages back on the same WhatsApp group so that the community members can, or the CAB members can have a document that they can use to respond to their fellow community members if they have any concerns. We also have a communications department aside from the engagement team, and just as Moses said, they're also on social, so they monitor the social media feed. Yesterday morning I was sharing with some colleagues that as I was coming down for breakfast, I was handling a crisis because an influencer, a really big influencer, a young man in Kenya, had posted something about Bill Gates and a study amongst pregnant women in Western Kenya, an area called Bungoma. And then along the comments, somebody else from Kilifi had responded and said, oh yeah, something happened to my wife. They tried to do this and this kind of things, and they're just using, Africans as guinea pigs. So, that was picked up by our staff actually, and then they sent it to my WhatsApp, and then we shared it with our communications person, and then they've developed sort of like what we are calling a holding statement. In case it comes up, then how should we respond? So basically, it's not foolproof, but those are some of the approaches we use to tackle, fake news.
It's great. Thank you. Thank you so much to our panelists. Thank you so much to the audience. We're going to have a short break now for coffee and be back here in 15 minutes sharp for our last session. Thank you.
Adriano, pode nos ouvir? Raquel, você nos ouve? Sim? Sim para as duas, sim para a Adriana e sim para a Raquel?
Tem dois computadores. Sim, é uma.
Vocês estão com outro dispositivo ligado, celular? Que vocês estão aparecendo na tela para mim e em outro dispositivo ligado.
Sim, tem outro dispositivo ligado.
Então, desliga, por favor, porque está dando retorno para a gente.
Ah, tá. Vai desligar.
Fica só no computador, por favor.
Ok.
Obrigada. Paul, can you hear us?
Yes, very well.
Thank you. We'll be back in a few minutes, okay? Okay. Just stay on and we'll go back. Meninas, a gente volta daqui a pouco para continuar, tá bom? A sessão. Obrigada, viu? Não sai, fica aí, obrigada.
Ok.
Não. Meninas? Eu de novo. Vocês vão precisar ficar mais agarradinha. Uma da outra, para poder a gente conseguir ver vocês direitinho. Para a direção da janela, mais um pouquinho para onde está aparecendo a janela, lá no fundo. Vira um pouquinho mais. Excelente. Obrigada, meninas.
Next round table. And for this table, I would like to invite Jake and Eduardo from One Day Sooner. And we'll have the participation of Paul Zimmer, Harwood, online, and also Raquel Nunes and Kelma Matos from the community of Americanias. Hi, Paul. Thank you so much for joining in. Oi, Raquel e Kelma. Muito bom que vocês se juntaram a nós nessa tarde. Jake, can you step up, please? Dudu is not here, right? Oh, Dudu, please.
And this is the.
Yeah, this is the.
Is there a laser?
There it is.
Good? Okay, awesome. Thank you so much, Helton, for inviting me. These are always, I've given this presentation or similar a couple times, and it's always pretty funny. Well, first of all, hi, I'm Jake. I work at One Day Sooner, which is a nonprofit I'll introduce a little bit more. I handle a lot of our kind of research ethics and participant engagement stuff. And it's kind of funny to me. I've given similar presentations a few times, and the setup's always very similar. It's like, okay, you're gonna, we'd love for you to speak, and it's, by the way, everyone else on stage is like an MD or a PhD, an MD, PhD. The guy who invented this vaccine, people from like the most prestigious and powerful institutions you've ever heard of. And I'm here because I got dysentery and Zika on purpose. And so it's a very different sort of set of qualifications. But I am a two-time participant in human challenge studies for Shigella at the University of Maryland and Zika, which was done by Anna Durbin, who was here previously. Obligatory disclaimer is that my organization does not require people to get diseases because that would be ridiculous and unethical, but it's something that some of us have done, and that is how I started working in this space. And yeah, it's a fun story. If you want to catch me afterwards, we can talk about the BuzzFeed article that happened. So One Day Sooner, though, so a little bit about us. We're a US registered nonprofit focused on public health and broadly things like biosecurity. The question we ask ourselves is like, what can we do as an advocacy organization to kind of augment the capabilities of the organizations like those represented here already doing great work to fight infectious disease and to decrease the suffering of infectious diseases. And particularly we want to approach that from the perspective of volunteers who are kind of form the backbone of the research that's necessary to make advances in modern medicine. The core thesis that we kind of believe in is that healthy research participants are, again, this kind of core backbone. But there's not an interest group that represents healthy participants. In the United States, you have very influential groups like Susan B. Komen, which represents people who have breast cancer. And there's nothing like that for healthy participants. But that doesn't mean that we don't have interests that need to be represented. One of those is, how are we sure that we're represented in the research process well? How are we treated well? And there are, ethics systems and regulations in place to help make sure of that. But independent groups like ours, we think we can be helpful. And I think at a separate level, too, there's a question of how do we make sure that what participants do and the sacrifices that they make are well used, right? If Elton has a beautiful hookworm model that happens here in Brazil, which someday I believe it will, and then he does this challenge, and then a year later he's like, this is kind of boring, I'm going to become a painter, and just takes all the data and throws it in the trash, right? That's probably not very respectful of how the participants who joined a study like that, right? And so we try to ask ourselves, what are the kind of policy mechanisms, the meta-science, the lots of levers and knobs that you can turn outside of just the clinical standpoint that can make sure that when volunteers do things like get dysentery on purpose, that they are doing so not for frilly reasons. And I don't think that's a huge issue, but it's something that gets really, really complicated. And so as a result, One Day Sooner has a lot of what we call sort of downstream focus areas, and that can include things like helping set up new challenge models for things like hepatitis C. You're going to hear from Paul in a minute, who was in one of the challenge trials for the R21 vaccine, which is super cool, right? That vaccine's getting rolled out like this month in Africa, and it's probably going to save a lot of lives. And Paul was a very direct part of that process. We are really interested in pandemic preparedness policy. You heard from Catherine earlier about the really tough ethical questions about how you do something like a challenge model potentially during an emerging public health emergency. And then more broadly, we do research on chimp safety and ethics and often try to incorporate volunteers, which I'll talk about in a little bit. And for transparency purposes, we do not take any funding from industry or any sort of like pharmaceutical group or government. It's purely philanthropic and individual contributions. Our background, too, is pretty relevant here. We started literally as a Google form. Like, we had read paper, our founder, Josh, had read a paper about the prospect of potentially using COVID-19 human challenge studies during the pandemic, and quickly ballooned to, in the space of less than a year, about 40,000 people worldwide who were willing to say, look, this is something I've read about and I'm willing to consider myself. And that was really, I think, pretty moving, right? Because that does show that there is a pretty strong current of altruism that can motivate people to participate in really intensive medical research. And notably, second only to the United States in terms of absolute number of participants was Brazil. We had, I don't know the exact numbers, I tried to look it up beforehand, but our database—
15,000.
Okay, yes. So our database stops counting at 5,000. I had to go in and do some like really annoying math to figure it out. So I can say at least 5,000. But yeah. So one of the things that we really focus on is trying to bring the participant voice to this process. And you heard a lot about this great community engagement stuff occurring beforehand, and we try to take it, we try to carry that ball further. And what that can mean, and so what that often means is we reach out to participants. You can see a collage of the people who got their photo to me on time after I sent a very last-minute email. This is just a small fraction of the people that we kind of interact with. People who have been, and this includes people from United States, United Kingdom, Malawi, Canada even, and so we have kind of a network of people who have done human challenge studies and are really engaged and active. We call them kind of activists. They were very interested in not only the study that they were in, but the kind of broader context in terms of science, research ethics, governance, and law, to make sure that what they did was for the greater good, truly. And I understand they can be kind of a little bit buzzwordy, so here's some pretty concrete examples of ways we've integrated volunteers into the interface that I would say that, quote, the ivory tower can kind of interact with. That's academic papers you can see over here. This is a paper that was co-written by 4 of us who are all human challenge veterans, talking specifically about upcoming proposals for hepatitis C human challenge studies. Another person who's in the Zika model, I connected him with a journalist in the United States at a pretty well-read technocratic sort of magazine, and he ended up writing about the experience for a more general audience. We've done, you can note, I have more pictures like this, but I wear the exact same thing to every single conference, so I wasn't going to try to out myself like that. But we've brought other participants on stages and kind of helped them navigate what is admittedly a really high barrier to participation in sort of interfacing with the powers that be, right? You can't. It's hard, having to learn how to speak the language of academia and of government and law is not easy. And in a perfect world, we'd not have to worry about navigating those barriers. But one thing that One Day Sooner tries to do is, given that those barriers exist, how do we help people sort of overcome them or be able to talk through them to people to decision makers like those who are in this room or watching virtually. And other things too, we'll conduct focus groups and talk to studies about what are better ways to maybe craft their protocols, both from an efficiency standpoint, again, going back to this thesis where it is in the participants' interest that a study is well run and efficient, and volunteer comfort and safety. And then things like community advisory boards. One thing I'm really proud of at that bottom there is you can see kind of notes from this little website of a community advisory board for, again, proposed upcoming hepatitis C human challenge studies, which are super interesting. And we have that advisory board, which is a kind of really good mix of people who have had hepatitis C, either through injection drug use or transfusion, people who work in an advocacy space, and then 3 of us who have been in human challenge studies for other diseases and who've kind of been through that process. And that's a really good example of how we integrate people who have walked the walk, so to speak, to make sure that studies are better designed and that overall that our interests are being taken into account. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my motivation. You've heard a lot about kind of, I think, compensation already. I can monologue about that for like an hour, and I will not subject you to that, but feel free to come and talk to me afterwards. But when I signed up for the Shigella study, this was before I worked for One Day Sooner, I knew what dysentery was. In the United States, it is vanishingly rare, and it is something I kind of associated with pioneers 200 years ago. And so when I saw this ad on Instagram, I learned about it and I started reading, and it kind of struck me that oh my God, depending on who you ask, about 1/4 to 500,000 people die of this disease every year, despite the fact that antibiotics exist. And it just struck me as really cosmically unfair, right? So by no work of my own, I was born in the United States in a very clean, safe hospital, and I didn't have to worry about the litany of diseases that still kill children every single day elsewhere in the world. And that's really fundamentally unfair and unjust, right? And so I was pretty drawn to the idea of kind of paying that privilege forward. It's I was able to grow up healthy and don't have any outstanding health issues that kind of would affect my ability to participate. And it felt really cool to be able to say, yeah, I'm going to temporarily sacrifice my health for a week or two, and maybe someday that ends up, moving the needle forward, and helping people who are not so fortunate, getting sick so others don't, so to speak. And I get a little bit choked up thinking about it even now. I can tell you when you get dysentery, it sucks. It is not a fun disease. And I got a little bit emotional in that process. I never felt unsafe. I knew that I was really well cared for, but it sucks to think how scary it must be if you are a child under 5 or the parent of a child, knowing that this disease could kill them and that you just don't have any, the resources are not there to protect you. But another thing, I'm not going to pretend I'm a saint here. In fact, I have a quote from BuzzFeed when they interviewed me. I'm not Mother Teresa, right? I was totally willing to do this. I would not have done it for free. I had to take 10 days off of work. I had to pay someone to look after my dog. I'd have many phone calls with my dear mother, assuring her that I would be fine. And it was hard. It was not comfortable. It was, dysentery again is pretty painful. And so for me, that compensation was an important factor. And I want to stress here, I won't beat a dead horse, but I do not believe that compensation and altruism are mutually exclusive factors, right? We would not suggest that firefighters or police officers or teachers or nurses, people who do what we probably consider pretty altruistic jobs, necessarily have to, like, we don't consider their desire for compensation to be abnormal or unfair. And I understand there's a lot of work to be done around the concept of undue inducement and how that translates into low and middle income countries. I recognize that it's one thing for some American guy to come up here and tell you how to do things in Brazil, but I do think that that's worth noting in terms of the overall kind of ethics of how we approach research like this. And as you've heard previously, there is, compensation does tend to be a pretty decent motivator, but I want to stress again that that's not mutually exclusive. And you're going to hear from Paul in a second. Paul was a student at Oxford and has did 2 human challenge studies before he joined One Day Sooner. And so I'll turn it over to Paul and he can talk a little bit more about some of the other things that were on his mind and what it was like for him to get malaria and COVID on purpose.
Hi, can you hear me well?
Yes.
Thank you. Jake, as I don't have control of the slides, can I just say next picture or next slide and then you can click for me?
Yes.
I guess it's probably yes. Yeah, so thank you for the great overview, Jake. So I think my task here is just to maybe give a bit more of an idea of the bandwidth of people that actually get involved in these trials. So I'll just tell you a little bit about me and what my experience were actually like. So I'm a scientist by training. I did a bachelor in cognitive science and neuroscience master, and then I ended up in Oxford, where I'm about to finish my PhD. And just very recently, I've started to work for One Day Sooner. So back when I actually participated in the malaria and COVID challenge trial, I didn't even know they existed. And for the malaria one, I think actually One Day Sooner didn't even exist yet. Next picture, please. So I have a very scientific background, and I think that really helped in me getting into this. So I have no science skepticism at all. I do trust institutions. I do trust the scientific process. It's all I've been basically trained at in the last 10 years or so. And obviously, my studies naturally led me to research participation. You'll have a lot of friends who run studies who need someone to participate in them. Next picture, please. One of them, for example, was a metabolism study where just for 2 weeks, every single day before breakfast, I had to cycle on a exercise bike for 2 hours. And then do a ramp test to total exhaustion for 2 weeks every single morning. And also had a biopsy before the first and last day and had blood samples and my breath analyzed during every single day. Absolutely exhausting, completely destroyed me. I'd say that one was probably more uncomfortable than any of the challenge studies I've ever done. But it was a very, very rewarding process. Next picture, please. This is me at the end of it with a slice of cake that I never again felt I deserved this much. And I think I'm just very fond of these unusual and special life experiences where you can help someone without actually sacrificing more than your time. And actually, I think also you gain a very, very unique experience. I will always remember this time. It's something that I will not be able to do ever again. And next picture, for example, something else that I did was donate bone marrow to a back then 13-year-old kid who was then cured of leukemia. Just incredibly rewarding things you can do that don't actually even cost you money. And then overall, I just think, next picture, please. I just really like mental and physical challenges. So, for example, there's a picture of me doing a 250-kilometer ultramarathon in the Sahara. I just think that's something that's very unique to me, that I just strive for things that I think are experiences you can't get any other way. And then next slide, please. So what it's actually like to participate in one of these studies. Next picture. So this is a capture of the malaria mosquitoes that I put on my arm just so that I would get malaria. And I was actually a control participant for the method of malaria being functioning. So I knew from the beginning I would not be getting a vaccine, I would not be getting a placebo at all. I'm just there to make sure that everyone else who participates in the study actually really gets infected with malaria through this method. It's obviously super important. You don't want to end up with a vaccine that seems like it has 100% efficacy, but actually it's just that you didn't give people malaria the right way. Super interesting experience, but I think I'm going to talk more about the COVID study because it's more recent, and also it was an inpatient experience. Thanks, Jake. So that is obviously a screening process first. Then you have to stay at home, quarantine there for 3 days before you get into the Jenner Vaccine Institute in Oxford, into their facilities. And then I stayed there for, I think, 15 or 16 days, where they were trying to really make me comfortable. I think, next picture, please. It was a really busy schedule. I thought, oh, wow, I have 2.5 weeks just to myself to really catch up with work, perhaps. I did take my laptop, of course, and maybe even read a book. But it's a really busy schedule. You have your vital signs taking 3 times a day. You have blood tests. You have a cognitive test that takes half an hour. It's actually really quite busy. But back then I was also training for triathlon, so I asked if I could take my exercise bike into the hospital. Next slide, please. Which amazingly they let me do. And it's small things like this, being able to order your favorite snacks beforehand, it's just like that really make you feel valid as a participant, and that really can help make the difference of making it a comfortable and interesting time, and making you maybe interested in doing that experience again. And final picture, please. I really enjoyed my time there, and I think it's a very unique thing to be able to participate in someone's work like this. Being a scientist myself, I know how hard it is to run science and how often it can go wrong and not be quite what you expected. And I actually feel quite grateful also to participate in other people's work like this and be give a contribution to that. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Jake. Before moving to the Brazilians, I would like to ask you, Paul, especially Jake, when he was giving his presentation, he said what moves him to engage in team studies. And I would like to hear from you. You've been in 2 which we would consider very dangerous team studies. Like if someone doesn't know what is it about, they would say, well, someone gets infected with malaria, and there are still people thinking that it is unethical to do a SARS-CoV-2 team. So my question to you is, do you think it is unethical, and what motivated you to participate in these trials?
I think there's several components here. So, of course, there is the chance that your contribution might help develop a vaccine that could potentially save millions of lives, which obviously is amazingly rewarding, and it's hard to just omit that. But I think additionally, also, if you think about the risk, in my case, it was a COVID reinfection trial, so I did have COVID before. I knew quite a bit about the process of the COVID infection. Back at the point was in summer 2021, so already we knew quite a bit about COVID. And I think also having had COVID before really helped me not being as scared, because I kind of knew the effect that I was expecting it to have on me. Also, there were already some preliminary results from population studies in Denmark, for example, that quite clearly showed that there is some sort of protective effect just from having had COVID before. So I was thinking that overall the symptoms are probably not going to get worse than the first time. So I did have somewhat of a gauge of what I was getting myself into. And the next thing is that I think just having been young back then, just made my statistical chances for not having any complications pretty high. So when I just did a back of an envelope calculation on this, like I realized that my risk of having complications were lower than dying in a traffic collision in the same quarter of a year. So that was just something, when looking at these numbers, I just felt like, okay, this is something I can justify doing, not just in front of myself, but also the people that care about me, which I think is an important part of this. Yeah, and I think I'll leave it at that, actually, before I steal too much time.
Thank you. Dudu, I would like, you have never been a volunteer of a team study, right?
No.
Yeah, because you are Brazilian. So, but you have participated in other clinical trial, right? In at least one clinical trial that you told me. But still you got involved with One Day Sooner, which is an organization that promotes the importance of team. So what led you to get involved with this organization?
So it's a good question. because during the pandemic, I started to think, how can I help with this situation? And the risk is low in a team. We are a lot of ethics specialists here talking about this. So how cannot I decide to participate on team? So it's completely ethical on my point of view, and the point of view of the most part of ethicals. So I think it's necessary to participate to have earlier a vaccine.
Do you want to comment on your experience in being a study volunteer in other studies, in other trials?
Oh, as a leader?
No, as a participant.
Oh, it was. I take a lot of time doing blood, retiring, doing tests and something. But I think I felt my participation was much more interesting. It's a possibility to solve something. It's really necessary to have volunteers to have vaccine. So if we receive vaccines or medication and people are alive because of this, it's because of the volunteers. Mm-hmm. So why cannot me participate on this? So it was my what put me on this situation.
Okay. Deixa eu falar pouquinho aqui com as nossas participantes lá de Americaninhas. So we have two participants, study participants, that lives in the endemic area of hookworm, where we did an educational intervention to show them what is CHIM and what the study we were proposing was about. So I'm going to interact with them, and I'll try to translate the interaction. I'll try to be organic, but let's see. Raquel e Kelma, tudo bom com vocês? Estão ouvindo?
Tudo bem. Boa tarde.
Boa noite. Yeah. Vocês já participaram de estudos de pesquisa, certo?
Sim.
Quais estudos vocês participaram? Vocês lembram?
Estudo assim em si de pesquisa, a gente já, no caso, a gente participou das reuniões que tiveram, né?
Ah, tá. Vocês nunca receberam uma vacina experimental ou doaram sangue para o estudo, não?
Não.
Não? Você, Raquel, nunca também?
Eu sempre participo das reuniões e já também participei até uma certa etapa, mas tive que sair.
Okay. So I asked them if they have participated in a trial, and Kelma said she have not, just have participated in engagement, and Raquel said that she had participated in one, but she had to withdraw early. Vocês se lembram da reunião que nós tivemos sobre a infecção humana controlada? Certo?
Sim.
E vocês, inclusive, receberam a proposta de TCLE, né? Vocês leram?
Sim, sim,
Deu
recebemos.
Deu para entender?
Sim, entendemos.
So I asked them if they have participated in the meetings about the CHIM study, and also if they have received our informed consent proposal, and they said yes. So, do you know hookworm? Vocês conhecem o ancilostomídio?
Sim, conhecemos.
Tem muito aí?
Muito, bastante.
É. E o que ele causa?
Nossa, é um desconforto, bastante desconforto, dor abdominal, né? A gente sente muita fraqueza, dor nas pernas.
Ok. E você sabe que já foi testado vacina para esse verme aí, né?
Verdade, já.
É. E a vacina, a proposta que nós trouxemos de testar a vacina com infecção humana controlada, como que a comunidade enxergou isso?
Ó, na minha área, na época, porque eu sou agente de saúde também, né, aqui de Americana, só que eu faço a área de rural, no caso. O pessoal, em primeiro instante, ficou com um pouco de medo, né? Mas, assim, quando foi explicado para a gente, aí a gente entendeu, né, como que funciona e aí as pessoas saíram, né, óbvio, falando e tal, mas elas tiveram, todo mundo, assim, pelo que eu vi, tivemos, né, na verdade, um bom entendimento, assim. E por mais que tenha, assim, um pouco de medo, né, um certo medo, a gente vê que é muito grandioso poder, né, estar participando de alguma forma, poder estar ajudando de alguma forma. Então, assim, o que eu vi nas pessoas também e o que eu, né, particularmente senti foi isso.
Deixa eu traduzir aqui para o pessoal então. So I asked them if they know the hookworm, and they said they do. There are lots of hookworm infection in their area. So I asked what are the symptoms. They said abdominal discomfort and malaise. And then I asked if they remember that the CHIM proposal, they said yes. And I asked what was the community perspective, and she said that at first people was kind of afraid and scared, but as they understood, it became acceptable to them, and some of them were willing to participate in something that could be big, actually. Raquel, você quer falar alguma coisa?
Aqui em Americaninha, o pessoal, assim, quando fez para eles, né, para nós, na verdade, que chegou para nós essa questão, né, do estudo, a gente, no momento, a gente fica surpreso e, assim, um pouco inseguro, mas, ao mesmo tempo, a gente fica ansioso. Por que ansioso? Porque a gente quer se ver livre, né, desse verme. E quando fala de uma vacina para poder acabar com esse verme, é tudo que a gente quer. Então, o povo, né, a nossa população, eles receberam, né, muito bem, gostaram, né, da proposta, do estudo, quando eles vieram, participaram aqui da reunião, eles até acharam que seria para logo, né? Quando eu visitei eles novamente, eles até questionaram, nossa, mas eu já achei que já ia começar o estudo, né? De tão ansioso que a população, né, tá para poder começar o estudo aqui com a gente. Porque para nós será muito importante se ver livre desse verme, vai ser tudo de bom para nós.
So, deixa eu traduzir para o pessoal aqui que você acabou de falar. So, both of them are from different microregions in Americaninhas. I talked about what Kelma said, and Kelma lives in a village, while Raquel lives in the actual Americaninhas area, the small village, the biggest village around. So Raquel said that people that was present in our engagement were thinking that we were going to start the study soon. And this week she went to ask them what were the memories, and they were like, when it's going to start? And she said that people got very excited about it. At first, they also got scared and insecure, but as they learned about the proposal, they were like, well, this might solve a problem that we have here, and we want to get rid of ancylostomizes. If I'm translating, yeah. And we want to get rid of ancylostomizes. And so they were eager to contribute to the study. E aí, Raquel e Kelma, numa conversa anterior que nós tivemos, eu falei para vocês que o Comitê de Ética, tanto de Belo Horizonte quanto o Comitê de Ética Nacional, acharam que esse estudo era muito audacioso para ser feito em Americaninhas. Eles acharam que era um estudo muito difícil para o pessoal de Americaninhas entender, né? O que vocês acham disso? O que as pessoas com quem vocês conversaram acham disso?
Para nós, a gente não acha que é difícil, não. A gente conseguiu compreender muito bem, né? Até mesmo porque tem um termo de consentimento que foi explanado para a gente conseguiu acompanhar e entender. E até mesmo porque, se fosse há muito tempo atrás, né, no tempo dos nossos pais, seria difícil o entendimento. Mas hoje, o entendimento para nós aqui está mais fácil. Hoje aqui a maioria da população de Americaninha, arrisco dizer que 80% da população, as pessoas, né, estão se graduando, né, outros já se graduaram. Nós temos aqui enfermeiros, temos aqui na população mesmo, em Americaninha, né, no distrito de Americaninha, médico, né? Nós temos estudantes de biomedicina, né, e a gente fica maravilhado quando a gente sabe. A gente pode entrar aqui em alguma unidade ou educacional, de saúde, a gente encontra filhos mesmo de Americaninha. Ou seja, né, nós aqui de Americaninha, a gente cada dia está procurando, né, aperfeiçoar o nosso conhecimento, né? Então, para nós aqui hoje não é difícil a compreensão do estudo. Nós entendemos sim este estudo, tanto que nós estamos ansiosos para que o estudo continue, né? Por que a gente fala assim ansioso? Porque uma vacina contra o ancilostomídeo tudo de bom. Porque uma vacina, nós sabemos que uma vacina demora muito tempo para ser desenvolvida. Quando veio esse estudo para nós aqui, nós ficamos ansiosos, vamos dizer assim. Por quê? Porque quando a gente, né, viu no termo que é uma infecção controlada, uma infecção humana controlada e vai ser desenvolvida com menos tempo, então a gente quer abraçar de todas, né, da melhor forma, contribuir, e é isso, nós entendemos sim. Hoje não temos mais dificuldade de compreensão, porque nós todos aqui em Americaninha, a gente procura estudar, né, e está sempre, sei lá, com a tecnologia também, doutor, está muito fácil para todos, né? Uhum. Mesmo uma região distante, que é a nossa região de Americaninha,
deixa eu só traduzir.
Ao mesmo tempo, fica mais fácil.
Senão vou esquecer o que você está falando. só um minutinho. So I asked her that, I said to her that the Ethics Committee of Belo Horizonte and the National Ethics Committee thought that the study was too complex for Americaninhas people to understand. And I asked what she thinks about it, and she said, well, maybe long time ago, in the age of my parents, that might be so, but today we have access to good education. She said that 80% or so of Americanians population either has a bachelor's degree, a graduation, or they are doing college. And they have nurses, and they have doctors, and they have people doing biomedicine, studying biomedicine. And she said that's not rare to go in a healthcare center in the communities around and see someone from Americanians that is graduated. So basically she's saying that we are not ignorant anymore. So and she said, we can understand, we did understand, and we are willing to contribute with this study because it might solve a health problem that is keen to us. And on the top of that, she said she actually used the term controlled human infection can accelerate a problem that we have. I mean, accelerate the solution of a problem that they have. Ok, muito obrigado. Vocês ficam aí, porque ainda vou fazer mais algumas perguntas, né? Mas agora eu vou fazer mais algumas perguntas gerais. Vou fazer em inglês. Quando chegar a vez de vocês responderem, eu falo em português, tá bom?
Ok.
One thing that I would like to ask, especially to Paul and Jake, but also to Dudu and our guests in Americanias, is that if you feel exploited, and this might sound a very basic question, but those who were here earlier and saw Brunello's lecture talking about autonomy and how our ethics committees in Brazil are sort of paternalistic. So I would like to ask if you that participated in research and clinical trials, if you feel exploited or if you would do it again. Jake, you can.
Well, considering my full-time job is now to transmit propaganda about how great this is, one would think that you probably know my answer. No, but no, I think, as I mentioned, even when I was in the throes of dysentery, which, as I said, is not a fun disease to have, I at no point felt like fear or mistreatment. Like I knew what I had signed up for. Very rarely do you present to a doctor and they know exactly what stage of what infection you have at that exact moment, right? And so it's important. I think we've heard context in this symposium so far about how the devil's in the details. There's certainly really unethical chims that have been done over the past century or so, and I think that as Catherine Littler mentioned, though, we are in this is a little bit of a different ball game in the past several decades, and so I did not feel exploited whatsoever. I do not regret my participation in any sense, and I think that that's something that we broadly heard from volunteers we interacted with Wendy sooner is this sense that even for those for whom it was a little bit more burdensome than they expected, that they still felt proud of their contributions, and that there was not I have not encountered a sense of any indications of widespread sense of grievance or anything from people who participated, even among those like me who got pretty seriously sick at one point.
Paul?
I can only completely agree. So I never felt exploited at any point. In fact, I did do it again, and I would do it again in a heartbeat. I think it was a valuable experience to me, and I'm pretty happy I had the experience, and I feel like it added a lot to my life also as a participant. You, in your first question, touched on the question whether I thought it was ethical to conduct COVID studies. I think, in fact, and you also touched on this already, is that I feel it's actually unethical not to allow me to do that. I feel like I have my own agency. I can make my informed decisions. You talked about paternalism. I believe in a sort of soft paternalism. So we want to make sure that people have the information they need to do the right decision on their behalf, but we don't want to dictate that decision to them. I think that's just what your own agency means. And I think also in the eye of a doctor, for example, who might say that you should first do no harm, I think we really need to consider also, even though it's difficult and it's really hard to make these calculations, of course, but we also need to consider the harm we're doing by not doing something. And so I think it would actually be unethical in some ways sometimes to not allow people to participate in very important science like this. And so I could see how someone could feel exploited, especially in the past. Jake mentioned this. But I feel like we really moved forward as a society, and I feel like the participants can be an active part of this conversation of how we should do these gyms so that we can do them better than they have been done 100 years ago.
I'll add really quickly too that Paul is being really modest. I had to like interrogate him about this, but Paul, you got malaria, like really, you got malaria, and you were talking to me about it. You're like, oh yeah, like I had friends visit Oxford, and I like showed them a tour around, and then the fever hit again, and I had to like stop everything I was doing because it was so like. So I'd add there too, Paul's being very modest. Like he went through it.
Yeah. Well, I really.
I think it's very different to have doctors look after you at every single point compared to being somewhere where you don't have that. So I don't feel like that's modest. I feel like the people who don't have that access deserve far more credit.
Yeah, I really like that you touch the question that it is unethical not to do something, and it is unethical to prohibit someone that is willing to do something to do so. So thanks, Paul, for this comment. I think that's very telling for Brazilians. Dudu, do you want to?
Yeah. No, I don't feel like that because what I received participating in a test of vaccine, in my case, is much more value than money. So to help or try to help, be a part of this was very, very important for me. It's altruism. It's why we are here. Not on this school, but in the world. It's not for money. It's not for taking risk or not. It's to help each other. So we need to.
Let me question you, because you touched the point, which is altruism. And sometimes when we are dealing with ethics committees in Brazil, they say, well, the study participant gotta have some benefit. How do you see that? Like, if we're doing by altruism, eventually you are not receiving any benefit. Would you feel exploited, or do you think that exerting your altruism is an important value that is your compensation already?
It's a good question, but a very difficult question. I see in this model some difficulty for part of the people, especially in poor countries, how to participate if you will stay like one day testing. So at least we must give them money to pay this day. But it was very difficult in the USP when I tested, I participated. I see the difficulty to achieve that public, that poor people to come and participate. So it's necessary to compensate the people. Mm-hmm. In my personal point of view, if we give money more than compensate, we will select the people who need more money to participate. I think
we need to balance.
Yeah, we need to balance to don't choose the people who will participate.
Mm-hmm.
If we don't pay nothing, we will put only people who have access of money. So how to solve this?
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, I would add, and this is something I tried to mention, I think it's really important to kind of separate the idea that altruism and compensation are mutually exclusive, right? I brought up the example of nurses and teachers and firefighters are people who we expect to be paid for the contributions they make to society. And so there's a pretty significant diversity of opinion on this. But I think that, like the idea that I also, I personally take issue with the idea that there has to be a benefit to the individual in the context of clinical research. I think that it is, again, what we saw with 1 Day Sooner is people willing to at least, understanding that there was a lot of uncertainty even in the COVID challenge model. Like it was not a foregone conclusion that the challenge model would accelerate vaccine development, and it didn't, right? But even then, people willing to sit there and understand that there's that uncertainty and there's that chance that the outcome you maybe hope for would not have happened. And once they signed up, when these studies were promulgated, right, it was very clear they were not being used to test vaccines anyway. But this, I think it's the real world experience that we've seen with 1 Day Sooner is that there are plenty of people who are at least conceptually willing to do this sort of thing in the exact same way that we have people who do kidney donations to complete strangers. And so if the idea, like, if you believe in the context of clinical research that there has to be benefit to the individual, then it follows then that we probably should consider people who donate kidneys to be acting against their better interests. Kidney donation is relatively safe, but you do die from that. Like people can die and do die, and they don't gain anything from it. And so unless we're willing to go that far and say, oh yeah, we shouldn't allow people to donate kidneys to strangers, then that to me is a very morally repugnant conclusion, right? I think that similarly we need to counter this idea that people can in fact participate for little to minimal benefit to themselves, but also keeping in mind still that like you can be compensated and still have an altruistic sort of motivation.
Kelma e Raquel, eu perguntei para eles, né, se participar de um estudo de pesquisa, porque todos eles já participaram de um estudo de pesquisa. Então, como eles se sentiram? Se eles se sentiram explorados ou não. E aí eles responderam que nenhum deles se sentiu explorados, que eles inclusive participariam novamente. E a gente acabou discutindo um pouco aqui sobre a questão de entrar na pesquisa por altruísmo e ter um benefício. Então, no exterior o pessoal pode receber para participar de pesquisa. Aqui no Brasil não pode, é mais complicado você pagar para os participantes de pesquisa. Vocês nunca receberam para participar de pesquisa, o pessoal de Americaninhas nunca recebeu recursos para participar de pesquisa aí. E eu gostaria de saber de vocês, então, se vocês se sentem explorados ou não de participar de pesquisas.
Aqui, até onde eu sei, ninguém nunca recebeu, sempre foi voluntário, né? As pessoas quiseram participar e participou. E, assim, eu nunca cheguei a participar, mas conheço, né, várias pessoas que participaram e ninguém aqui nunca recebeu, não. Sempre foi voluntário mesmo.
Mas elas se sentem exploradas de ter participado da pesquisa? Não.
Em momento algum, assim, falaram que foram não, sabe? Todos entenderam, né? Entendeu o propósito e participou e não se sentiram não, explorados não. Ao contrário, aqui sempre foi, assim, a saúde, às vezes é um pouco difícil, né? Por ser interior, e as pessoas quando vieram participar sentiam muito acolhidos e, na verdade, várias pessoas queriam muito participar porque eram muito bem acompanhados, né? Por médicos, exames. Então, as pessoas queriam participar também para ter esse benefício, né? Que às vezes é tão difícil de ter. Se a pessoa não tem, assim, condição em pagar, por exemplo, exames, a pessoa fica muito tempo sem fazer. E, às vezes, as pessoas queriam muito participar para ter isso que eram oferecidos, né? Mas, na verdade, por fazer parte, né, do bem-estar do paciente, então isso é oferecido. E aí
deixa eu só traduzir aqui.
Participar para ter esse benefício, na verdade.
Tá. Deixa eu traduzir, senão vou esquecer. So, I asked them about if they feel exploited in participating in studies because especially they cannot receive any compensation by participating. And she said that no, they don't feel, but she never heard about someone receiving money to participate in a study in American Indians, and they don't feel exploited. Actually, they like to participate because they have access to better health care. So they feel well taken care of, and they do exams which they cannot pay, and they have access to physicians and nurses, so that they consider some sort of compensation. Raquel, você quer falar alguma coisa sobre isso?
Nós não nos sentimos explorados, não. A gente participa, né, voluntariamente e participamos de livre e espontânea vontade. Por quê? Porque nós acreditamos que um estudo para poder desenvolver uma vacina para nós, a gente fala para nós, porque assim, nós, enquanto população, que vamos ser beneficiados quando a vacina for, né, desenvolvida. Então a gente não se sente explorado, a gente quer participar, né, e participa de espontânea vontade.
So she said that they don't feel explored. In contrary, they want a vaccine for hookworm, and they want to contribute for this vaccine. So, and because of that, they exert a free will to participate in a study. Okay, I would like to thank you so much, Jake, Dudu, Paul. Gostaria de agradecer vocês, Kelma e Raquel, por estarem presentes com a gente. I don't know if any of you would like to give some final thoughts before we close the table. No, you're good. Vocês duas querem dar algum recado antes da gente encerrar a mesa?
Eu queria desejar uma boa tarde, uma ótima reunião para vocês. E assim, o recado da gente é que nós estamos esclarecidos, né? E torcemos para que dê certo, né? De vir fazer no caso, esse estudo aqui, esse teste, né, dessa vacina, e estamos torcendo para que aconteça.
So she's saying good afternoon for us all, that we have a good meeting, and she's hoping that the trial of the vaccine actually can happen in American Indians. Okay, thank you so much. Obrigado a todos que participaram, and a salve of applause for our participants.
Elton, you have a job. If you don't succeed in research, simultaneous translation is your thing for you, definitely. So we're going to go for a last round table. And would you like to invite our debaters to the table, please? So Moses, Juan Lapa, Luis Rizu, Esper, and George, if you can please come to the stage. So we're going to have a discussion now with no presentation, so just really a discussion, and we don't need to take an hour, but I think it's going to be a very rich discussion about how controlling human infection models can accelerate the development of vaccines in low and middle income countries. And as George Khalil said, we have been discussing this for 2 days now, so he felt, what else can we possibly discuss? But I think it's a unique opportunity to bring, international people that have experience from other low and middle income countries, as well as in Brazil, one of, three of the biggest names in clinical research and vaccine development in our country. And I think it's a unique opportunity to ask some very hard questions to these three honorable guests. Please take a photo, because it's not always that I'll be in the stage with the three of them at the same time. So make sure that there is a photo that I can send to my mother later on.
They go drink together.
So maybe we can
Just have to look
start.
for the right bar.
I need to bring the photo, Elton. So if we can please start. Oh, thank you. Oh, great. Oh, wonderful. If we can please start by introducing yourselves, that would be great. Esper? Start from
Sure.
here.
My name is Esper Calaz. I'm current director for the Instituto Butantan, and I'm the one who drinks the least compared to the other two here.
I'm Luis Rizzo. I'm an allergist, immunologist, and the director of research and development at Einstein, and Esper is a big liar.
My name is Malaparup Sung from Faculty of Tropical Medicine, Mahidol University. So I lead the Vivax challenge model in Thailand, but also some other malaria research in the endemic area of Thailand.
I am George Khalil. I'm professor and head of Division of Clinical Immunology and Allergy at the School of Medicine, University of São Paulo. I'm a former director of Butantan, and I think I'm getting old because those two prominent scientists work with me for a long time.
I'm Moses Egesa. I'm a parasite immunologist and a senior scientist at the MRC Uganda unit, and I'm currently the project lead for our controlled human infection models.
That's wonderful, thank you. And I want this to be a very interactive session, so please ask questions. But I'm going to start first by asking you to raise your hands if you think that controlled human infection challenge models can help low and middle income countries to accelerate vaccine development. Great. So everybody can understand. Yeah, you too, guys, please. Wonderful. So I think that we can start from the perspective that we are very positive about doing that. But I would like to bring it to the context of low and middle income countries in Brazil and ask our panelists to please tell us which pathogens or vaccines do you think we could make a difference? Maybe something that's in the development, maybe something that's upcoming. We could make a difference, a real difference, to try to get something faster or maybe something possible by using a human infection challenge model. Any first thoughts on that? Esper?
Sure. Well, let me give you one living example. In 2016, we started a study to investigate a candidate vaccine against Zika. It's a DNA-based vaccine that was developed at the VRC. 25 sites across Central America, South America, and Caribbean. 2,400 volunteers, followed over a year and a half, 4 incident cases of Zika. So this study, and it was 2 sites in Brazil, one at UFMG here and one at USP. And the study was a complete failure because we did not meet the necessary endpoints to answer the question. Now, the possibility of having a challenge study, a controlled human infection model using Zika virus which would be much more efficient in bringing the answers, whether this vaccine could be utilized. If we face another outbreak of Zika today, we have no option, and we would be at will, of the pathogens of this disease and the consequences, especially in pregnant women.
That is a great example. Anybody else want to have another shot at this?
Well, I think that we have to think in many of these diseases like Zika that Esper mentioned are of interest of some countries. It's regionalized vaccines. And as I mentioned before, WHO is concerned about many of possible pathogens that can come up and had a list of prioritized pathogens. I think that we should look in detail at that list and see how we can contribute. And there is not another.
As the perspective of both sides, the investigator and also the one, excuse me, who also using the SHIM to answer some of the vaccine efficacy testing. So I think in the endemic countries, for example, in Thailand, in the context of malaria, especially for Vivax, in which even though we have the medicine, but the thing is that the curing of the disease is the endpoint. We want to prevent, not the treatment, right? And with the, in Thailand, we are also bordering with the Myanmar and Laos and other things. So cross-border malaria is also the big problem for us. So in terms of the faster the vaccine developments, we foresee that for CHIM, it could help for sure in the, to rule out what is the vaccine that may not be effective in the, the future clinical trials. So currently, our plan is to use CHIM to rule out some of the vaccines, to have more vaccines in the pipeline for further development. And the more complicated with the Vivax is that we have so many stages, like the hypnozoids, in which some of the treatment cannot be used, the transmission which is happened earlier compared to other falciparum or other malaria parasites. So vaccine, I'm talking about not only the single vaccine, but maybe the combination of the vaccine that can prevent different stages of the parasites. And to test that in the real clinical setting will be very challenging. So we would like to have the data on the efficacy earlier than that. And with the CHIM models that we're establishing, we could test both, pre-erythrocytic and erythrocytic. So that would best fit with the, the combination of vaccines as well.
That's a very good point. Down selection of candidates is a very important aspect of how these studies can be useful. And one more point, Jen, I would like to hear from the panelists is it's about the confidence we can have when a product is fully tested or fully developed in a population, Caucasian, predominant European, and then, it's a healthy problem and it's a vaccine that then is going to be rolled out, I don't know, in Africa or in South America. Is this part of the need for having these studies always to be done in these endemic areas, in this population? And could that, as part of a team study, be an important aspect that you have to see whether, a malaria vaccine for Vivax, for example, is as efficacious in Oxford students as it is in the middle of Brazil, in Manaus, for example?
Well, I think answer your question, Whitehead showed us that had 100% protection when he tested the dengue vaccine in the US, and then in the field here we had 80% to 90% protection, not 100%. So this is one case. Of course, so the way you get the infection and the way and all the genetic intervention is so important. The second point is there's a lot of work done by Sikali, and many of those works, I think Esper participated, where they have shown that you test a vaccine in Switzerland or in Africa, the immunogenicity of the vaccine is completely different because there is a background of inflammation that's different, and this brings, again, a difference in the response. And I think, Esper, that we have seen the same thing for our study with Sekali that was published recently, right, Esper? Yes.
I think it's important to point out that this is not only for infectious diseases. The question of in any clinical trial to have a broad span of people, it's as important in infectious diseases as it is in high blood pressure. We know that these things work differently. Of course, most of us here, if not all of us, are immunologists, so we like bugs and autoimmunity and allergy and stuff like that. But when you look at any other disease, if you look specifically at trials that have been done in the past 30 years, the predictability of usage universally is directly related to how broad the population that was studied really was. So I think that part of the discussion with Shen has been impaired by the fact that some people, especially those that don't see this as ethical, which we can go on and on. I think that apparently this has been overly discussed.
It's never too much to discuss that.
Well, you know, Brazil is a different place. We have to remember, you know, this is...
because it has been said also that Brazil is not for beginners.
Well, you know, it's the Jabuticaba issue. So I think that people tend to put an extra burden on this. So you have to prove that this is special for Chen and this is only for Chen. It is a clinical study. So you don't have to have extra ladders or extra steps or whatever it is. There is a scientific question. It is important to answer it because it will save lives, it will make people better. Khalil brought a very important point, I think, on the first question that you asked is the bugs that we only have here. Well, if we don't find the solutions here or in other countries that have specific diseases, the willingness to find them is much less than ours because you're swimming to get out of the river. The guy on the margins may throw you a lifesaver, but he may just throw somebody else a lifesaver. So we have to be able to own our own decisions, and that has been something that the country has been lacking for a very long time. So I think that we have to stop looking at this as a separate part of clinical research. It is an integral part, just like any other type of study, and treat it accordingly with general ethical principles and not morality issues that are mainly controlled by our view of the world, and which is generally wrong because it's
Great.
unique.
Yes. So regarding where to focus our trials, for example, the chain, you want to ask yourself, why are we developing these vaccines in the first place? If the vaccine is for tourists going to some tropical place, then you want to test that vaccine in those population. But if your goal is to reduce the problem in schistosomiasis, you want to go where the problem is, and that's in the fishing communities, which are not necessarily, say, elsewhere. So you have to go to the population, and then that population would actually benefit from it. Now, then I want to first go back to answer number one, where we say which disease. Obviously, because I'm working on schistosomiasis, I would naturally think about neglected tropical diseases, and particularly the ones that are parasitic. We know a lot about these diseases. So developing a model for them wouldn't be much of a problem because we know them. Actually, the first time I heard about the controlled human infection model is when I heard about Zika. And at the time, I even didn't know what Zika was. And I think most people didn't. And then, if I understood rightly, the first time it was rejected because maybe we didn't know much about it. So in that sense, it tells you we need to know the diseases we are dealing with, and parasitic diseases, we know them.
That's great. Oh, yeah, of course, please.
Yeah, so for a vaccine trial in general for tropical diseases in Thailand, we got a lot of question or feedbacks from not only the community but also at the higher level, like at the ministry, because they, even though they need to take care of the infectious diseases, but they hardly know about the disease. So the question that we always get from them is that why we need to test the vaccine in the population. That's a common thing. Why not other countries? If it's produced in India, why not in India? So we also ask them back, not only the higher authority, but also the community, whether if you have choice to get the vaccine, whether you want to get the vaccine that you know that it works in your population or work in somewhere else. So I give an example because I'm the lady, like when you want to buy clothes, you want to buy the one from, commercial, or you want the tailor-made one. If you have the choice, it's simple like that. So, if people have the choice and they understand that if the vaccine works, they will be the one that get the most benefit out of the vaccine. It's quite, easy to them to, accept that why we need to test the vaccine in the endemic areas. Yeah.
That's wonderful. Yeah, Elton.
Esper, I would like you to, Esper and Khalil, I would like you both to comment on the dengue vaccine, which is we were talking earlier, it's a proud accomplishment of Brazilian science, the phase 3 clinical trial. And Butantan, when decided to develop the vaccine, knew already by CHIM studies that it worked, right? Or more or less, like at least 100% in the, I don't know if you started before the results were released. So I would like to hear from the side of the producer, how knowing that a vaccine has a solid data in CHIM gives you confidence to invest like 1 billion reais on its development, further development that happened with the dengue vaccine.
Excellent question.
The sequence of events obviously started with the conceptualizing the phase 2 and phase 3 clinical trials here in Brazil prior to the knowledge or the results that came out from Ann Durbin's lab in clinical site, where she tested the vaccine prior to a modified dengue 2 challenge, and she found 100% protection. So we did not expect that result when we designed the study. Nevertheless, when this result came out, it was very reassuring, and especially for dengue 2, because if you remember, and I think you certainly remember, but some of the members of the audience may not remember the fact that the dengue 2 component of the dengue vaccine that we are pushing forward is a chimera that represents only the membrane and envelope from dengue 2, which would be considered the Achilles heel of the dengue vaccine. Seeing that in this very controlled human infection model was 100% protective against dengue 2 was something that brought us a lot of relief that we were working in a very promising product.
So when we brought the vaccine to Brazil, they had the virus, attenuated virus, prepared in a certain way, frozen, and they had tested in a phase 1, and they have shown that they induce neutralizing antibodies. So we have used this information to go directly to a phase 2. But that was a tricky discussion, because they said, well, this is not exactly what we are testing here, because you took a frozen and thaw virus just before injecting for immunization, while you have done an industrial development. And that's a very important thing that we have done. The industrial development was not easy because of the instability of the virus, the purification in high quantities, and also lyophilization and so on and so forth. So, but we finally got the permission to go to a phase 2, and I would say that we were pretty sure that it would work, because it worked well in these individuals that were not exposed in the United States. And here, in our cohort of the phase 2 that we have published together, there were people that had already disease and didn't have disease, and the results were the expected ones, and people that had disease before had an even better response as expected. So the problem we had, and that's very unfortunate, is that with the phase 2 data that was so clear, we asked immediately for a phase 3. And it took more than 1 year to be accepted at that time. And we lost the 2015 outbreak. That was pretty big. And I cannot remember now, perhaps Asper would help me, to say what were the viruses that were circulating. 1 and 2, I'm sure, but perhaps 4 at that time. Do you remember? 4, right? So we could have had a much better test. But that is the intervention of the politics and the science, okay? Because this was a very important vaccine. So the president of the country wanted to be in the room for the first shot of the phase 3. So I have pictures, I can show you. For the first shot of the first volunteer, there was the governor of São Paulo and the president of Brazil. So this took a long time, and this bothered me a lot because we did lose the 2015 outbreak. That we could have done it in 2015 because of the number of dengue cases we had at that time, and all the centers were working. We were already working and vaccinated many people. So, so this is the story, and I think, and I hope it's not going to repeat with the other important vaccines that are coming out, and Butantan is going to test very soon.
These are 9 years, right? 2015 to now. These are 9 years, and I did not know about that story. But it just go back to the point that you have made earlier about when, pathogen transmission and epidemiology comes and goes. And sometimes, and Esper has mentioned about the Zika point, and during the pandemic, of course, we had that with SARS-CoV-2 at some points, particularly in the UK. I remember when the lockdowns came, that the cases decreased, and we were in the trials, we were looking and saying, now this is going to slow down another 6 months of the vaccine development. So obviously, there are all the sorts of influences that comes when you're doing setting up a clinical trial. You can spread yourself around geographically to try to catch the epidemiology, but I think that the point that Esper made right at the beginning, and you as well, George, was if you have a way of deliberately infecting people with in a way that you control that attack rates that we call, the way that you control how many people are going to get infected, it's transformative, and maybe get you confidence in the process as you move along, and that's a very important aspect I want to emphasize today. Does anybody has any more questions? While you're thinking about, I want to go back to, there is one here. Yeah, good, yeah.
Hi, thank you for all your insightful words. My question is, I think we all agree my question is that we all agree for the importance of CHMI studies. I just kind of want to take a step back for LMICs just slightly before implementing the CHMI study. How do we think about implementing capacity to get to the point where we are also developing our own products, developing capacity? I know we've come a long way, but to improve the capacity to begin to design our own vaccines and make our own vaccines that we can begin to put into these models, other than waiting majority of the time for vaccines to be brought from higher impact countries, so to speak. And also to I guess just get the Brazilian perspective of to get our governments to, or what kind of, to get our governments to begin to put in more funding. I think a lot of countries had said they'd give like 1% of GDP to fund research in LMICs. Just to get your perspectives and your experiences and thoughts on that.
I think that there's so many different things that you attack there. First thing that you have to believe that you can. That's the first thing. And I think that in general, especially in developing countries, often we don't believe that we can. The second thing is money is the secondary thing, amazingly. This is a phrase from Professor Khalil, money is not a problem. Money is solution. And it is true. The first thing that we have to do is to believe that we can, to set up to do these things, to answer these questions, as, for instance, the dengue vaccine or the chikungunya and other stuff that we are doing. And I insist, it is funny because I'm an immunologist too, and I keep bringing this thing back to other non-immunological problems. So regarding the government, I have a very particular view about government, so I don't think that I'm the very best person to talk about it, but I think that government doesn't really exist. What exists is society. So if society is developed enough to understand that this is important, money will come. If it is not coming directly from taxpayer money, it will come from donors, it will come from everywhere. But we have to develop, our countries have to develop the society so we understand that this is possible. We are going through the Summer Olympics, and I was talking to Khalil about this, and we look at how we perform as a role, as a group on the Summer Olympics. And it's interesting that we take the perspective that the result is more important than preparation. There is no result without preparation. So it doesn't matter if the governments everywhere decide to put 10% of the GDP into doing anything, would we really be able to use this money? So preparation comes before. That's the way I see this. We have to create a sense that we really can do these things, not necessarily waiting for somebody else above the equator to solve our problems. And then society moves on. Part of the discussion with Shin, and I love those two great girls. I want to I want to have them, adopt them. Is that there is a sense that there's a group of people that think that we are not capable. And these people are our people. It's not somebody from outside that is coming and saying, oh, you can't do this, or it is our people that think that we have to be tutored, we have to be controlled, we don't know what we are doing. So unless, as a group of countries, as a society, we decided, no, we are responsible for our own future, we can do this, we'll still be discussing 1%, 2%, 3%, and not real preparation. In Brazil, we only remember about the guy that goes on the paddles when he wins the medals, but it's silly. This guy trained in a river without no conditions whatsoever. The fact that he did it is just amazing. And science should be not left to amazing. It should be left to purpose. And
and preparation.
Yeah, I mean, you don't solve a problem by throwing money at it. You solve a problem by being prepared to solve it, believing that. But first thing, you have to believe that you can solve it. If you don't believe yourself, it's all lost, because there's no amount of money, no amount of incentive if you don't believe that you can do it. But once we believe, we have to convince the other people that we can do it. But the first step is convincing ourselves. It's not stopping at, well, I can't do this. No, I can. Of course I can. And if I can't, it's my burden to prove, not yours to tell me in advance.
Moses?
Yes, thank you. So, Rodney, I think that was a genuine question. I loved it because I think what we call development, or being able to do what we do, is because most people reach a point, most countries reach a point where they must take charge of their own problem. Whenever I pass by Dubai, you can imagine how hot it is. But then somehow, people there are surviving. It's because they have tailored everything to survive that heat. Now, why am I telling you that Dubai as an example? No disrespect at all. During the COVID
pandemic, my country, like yours as well, were used to getting the vaccines from elsewhere. But you saw what happened. The protectionism, is that how it's called? Where most countries were holding on to their vaccines. So what did that lead Uganda to do? There was a drive to start producing our own vaccines. And indeed, right now, there was a lot of money poured into that initiative. And now we are looking at developing 2 COVID vaccines. I know the pandemic is gone, but at least it tells you what we can do when you're pushed to the extreme. So indeed, we all have the capacity to do this. It's just that we have not been pushed yet. And I'm very grateful. The first time I had the vaccine, I remember I showed you the vaccines for schistosomiasis. Remember, one was in the US, another was in Brazil. So Brazil, for one, as an example, took it to get their own vaccine for schistosomiasis. So are you seeing where we're heading? We need to actually do it ourselves, because there will be a time when no one is able to give you.
I just wanted to do a comment when what means production of vaccines, right? So Brazil started to build cars 1950. What they had, the Volkswagen would come, and we would just put the pneumatic, the tires. Everything would come already ready from Germany, but it started, and then we continued doing it. What we had in Africa, we had some countries that could produce vaccines. Like in Tunisia, there is a rabies vaccine that was produced from the beginning of last century. And then there is a big effort in Dakar, Senegal. I'm part of the scientific advisory board of the Institute Dakar for at least 7 years, or we were trying to help them in set up as a production unit. The problem is production is something, developing is another, and there's a big difference. So you have to think, perhaps you can start producing, but you have to think in developing. And developing is not only the science that is done in a laboratory, but you have to cross the Death Valley. And the Death Valley is terrible in our countries. Here in Brazil, I mean, all South America and Africa and so on, because we don't have all the different parts of the different equipment to go through the desert. So I'm developing a vaccine, intranasal vaccine against COVID. That's not solved the problem yet. And but I could not do the CDMO development, the production of the in GMP conditions of the master cell bank. I had to do it elsewhere because we're not equipped. We're trying to get equipped for that. And that's very important to, when you think in developing a vaccine, that you have not only the basic science, but everything from the beginning to the end, or at least you have the money to buy the service to go to the beginning to the end. So that's very interesting, but I would like to repeat what I said in a meeting that occurred last week on CEPI in Rio. And I said there are two moments, with the peace moments and the war moments. Peace moments is we're living without pandemics or epidemics. Then you can buy service, you can go to the big CDMOs and buy to a reasonable price a way of doing this development of something that you have studied, the protection, the correlates of protection for the disease you're studying, and the vaccine that you have developed. And you can do it, and then you can get to a final product. But during the war, pandemics, I could not buy tissue culture medium to do my studies on the vaccine I was working. I could not buy plastic. I could not buy anything because the countries would keep their own materials. So we have to see, because in CEPI we're talking about equity, but equity is very difficult. I was part of IPG, COVAX. We have discussed, I don't know how many vaccines, but I keep saying, how many of the vaccines we have discussed actually arrive at the end during the time of the pandemic? So there is a time in the pandemic where the rich countries had already 2 shots of immunization to 90% of the population, while the poor countries have just 5% with 2 shots. So the equity on the distribution could be related to the local production. That's what we're trying to do. But the problem is, are we going to have access to the materials in order to produce it? Because we are dependent in many things, not only in the final production.
Yeah. So as a researcher in LMIC, we also part of the vaccine development. I wouldn't say that we never touch anything on vaccine discovery, because that's what we do since the beginning. But mostly, especially in Southeast Asia, before I entered the malaria world, I think most of the researchers just end up at the mouse model. Very rare that can go to the non-human primate. One of the major problem is also funding, even though most of the funding are from outside LMIC. But then what we've seen after the COVID is that the vaccine in most of the tropical diseases become the national importance, especially in Southeast Asia. So in not only in Thailand, our group also developing the mRNA vaccine for malaria, but we also see in Japan, in Indonesia, in Malaysia, they start having more, discovery of the vaccine, not only for Vivax, but also for example, Plasmodium knowledii, which is recently emerging. So I wouldn't say that we're waiting for vaccine from other countries. We're part of the development since the beginning for a long time, but whether when it's come to the clinical trials, whether we how much we involve at the later time of the trial or not, that's the different things. But I would say that one of the thing that we never, reluctant to say that we confident on the capacity that we do, but in terms of the capacity that beyond our, hands, for example, the vaccine production facility, the GMP production facility, in the old time we don't have that in countries, but now we start to having that due to the COVID, thanks for COVID, on the bright side. So I think you will see more and more the vaccine that generated from the LMIC countries, especially for malaria.
That's a very good point. I think, just want to emphasize that the pandemic has left us with one of the good things as a legacy, has been exactly these points we're discussing here. For the human challenge models, it certainly has shed light on, we have been doing challenge way before the pandemic, but because of the SARS-CoV-2 challenge, a lot of more people know what human challenge models are. A lot of more discussions about production of vaccines in low and middle income countries and equity of vaccines have been brought to light because of the pandemic. I wonder if we have any more last-minute thoughts or questions from the room. I think everybody looks very tired. Any closing remarks from our panelists? Last-minute remark or notes about the meeting, or any thoughts?
I think one of the biggest difficulties about controlled human infection models studies is bringing the discussion forward. I was during the break here going over this, because at some points in our scientific development here in Brazil, we faced situations where big advancements were brought forward, but we had some preconceived ideas that we should not touch on that point. We should not discuss that, which I think is ludicrous. It's an abomination. We need to find ways to bring these important points, and here's one for the discussion table, because once everybody starts to understand the needs and the difficulties, but the benefits of doing such studies, I'm sure many people will change their hearts and understand how important we can contribute, how deeply we can contribute to this scientific advancement, but most importantly, bringing products to save lives and alleviate suffering.
Yeah, I cannot agree more as per what he said. And it's a cultural issue. I mean, I think that the Latin world is much more conservative on this. The Anglo-Saxon world, where they had some influence, was much more open to this type of studies. But we have to discuss in the society and bring this to the people that make the decision, that is the IRBs, CONEP in Brazil, and Anvisa, the Brazilian FDA. But to reach these people, we have to convince the society and have these discussions, even with the scientists, because not even the scientists are convinced many times, as Esper was saying. And I think that's the way to go.
I think that, again, a lot of these decisions are not based in science or ethics. They're based in culture and how you see things. I was actually joking with Khalil because we use the word paternalistic. As a father, I take exception to that because it's always used in a bad way. And if somebody were to pick who would be more likely to overprotect, it would be a mother, so it should be maternalistic. That being said, as Khalil put it out, that there is a very important cultural question, and culture is hard to change. It takes years, dozens of years to change culture. However, there's only way to do it. It is through discussion and to try to bring, Elton and I have exchanged lots of messages for the past year and a half regarding your project. The only way to do this is to bring the other view in the open and really being able to argue about it. I have seen people that are very, very, I'll use the word conservative just because I feel in a very good mood today because I'm with good friends and of course I'm in public. I would have other words for this in private.
It's being recorded as well. And on YouTube.
I've seen people that are very conservative regarding any sort of clinical trial change their minds. And I can even give you how long the mind change lasts if they go to patient conferences. So they're very strict, and you can't do this, you can't do that, and you can't. And then you go to a patient conference, and you see the disease happening. You see how people are eager to, and again, it's not altruism or whatever it is. I mean, it is the need. And I think that you put it very well. I mean, there is a need in Dubai not to cook to death. So you have to find ways of being cool. And when these people that are very conservative, they see the need, they change for 6 months. I've been doing this for 8 years now, and I know exactly how long it lasts. Why it only lasts 6 months? Because just like a vaccine, you need a booster. These things have... Yeah. 6 months. Yeah. You need a booster. So we have to keep these discussions going. When Elton said, "Oh, we're going to do this," he said, "Count me in. I'll go there," because this is very important, not only for control infections, not only for vaccines, but for clinical research in general. We face some challenges, climate change. And I'm not going to discuss who is causing it because this is a moot point. I mean, if an airplane is falling, it doesn't really matter why it's falling. You have to figure out a way that it will not fall. So climate change will break havoc on what we know. I mean, there's about 2,000 prehistoric viruses that we don't know that are just being unfrozen everywhere. If we don't see clinical research in a different way, we are going to be in trouble. Especially in countries like Brazil, where people are again, conservative. Thank you. And thanks for the opportunity. And for letting me know that it's being taped, so...
So we can edit it later, yeah.
I won't get fired when I get back to my husband.
Yeah, just want to add on the CHIM model, what we foresee of having CHIM model for Vivax malaria in context. As we are aware that many institutes are developing the vaccines, and also as well as the establishment of the CHMI in multiple countries. Thailand is one. UK using also pre-erythrocytic, the sporozoite from Thai isolates. So I consider that the challenging agent is similar. But then there will be the one in Indonesia in the next few years, I hope. And if Brazil has one, then we will have multiple,
populations.
Yes, to test for the vaccine if we want, to rule out whether it can be, cross protect against multiple, continents of the world. It would be best, I think. That would
Wonderful.
be the benefit of the having CHIM, in my opinion. Yeah.
Thank you. Let's comment, Moses.
Yes. So my parting shot to the Brazilian team is, as he has put it nicely, you have to keep with the booster. And similar to COVID, the booster may be more than one, so you keep doing it. And indeed, during our challenge model for schistosomiasis, the first booster was to take the regulators from Uganda to the Netherlands to interact with the regulators about challenge models. So that was the first booster. But then after that, we kept going back to them every single time they want to ask a question. I was always on standby to head over there and explain, to the extent that we were about to just go to Parliament and discuss the same, but we're on standby up to now just to be able to discuss. So what am I saying? That engagement should continue as long as it takes. Hopefully funding will also be patient. Thank you.
Wonderful. Moses, Juan Lapa, George, Luis, and Esper, we're very grateful for your contributions today. It's wonderful to have you here. Thank you so much. Can I please ask Elton to come here for our closest remarks? Please, you can guys take your seat. Thank you. Maybe Elton, if you allow me to very briefly just make some final remarks. When we planned this, and I want to bring it back to that lunch with Rodrigo, I was frustrated and very disheartened, but where we are in the situation with the team project and team studies in Brazil, I can tell you after 2 days of intensive discussion, I leave here very optimistic. I leave here extremely humbled by the level of people we managed to bring together, by the level of discussion we managed to have in the last 2 days, by the number of viewers that have watched the YouTube videos online already. And I can tell you all, I don't know if every 6 months, but we're going to have lots of boosters in the next years to come. I want to thank you Elton, for being the driving force of this. It has been wonderful to work with you. And I want to thank you everybody that has persisted in the stage with us here and online until this Friday afternoon. Thank you so much, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Daniela. We couldn't make it without you. You brought a lot of power and your enthusiasm, and we made a great team because you were like electric and I'm more calm. So we balanced each other, and our helpers didn't fall apart. So I'm also very humbled with the team that we brought. Like, we really could bring top of the world that is doing CHIM. It was a great opportunity for Brazil to see firsthand what is been doing all over the world. And I thank you so much, Esper, Khalil, Rizu, Juan Lapa, and Moses for this last table. It really boosted me because I was like, when CONEP not approved my study, I was very disheartened and was like, I'm going to give up. And then some people saying, don't worry, just keep going. And Rizu, your words were very refreshing. I thank you so much for the encouragement that you brought today with your words. So thank you all the participants, the people that watched. We have already almost 300 views in our meeting of yesterday morning, and over 150 views of the meeting of the afternoon. The meeting of this morning is almost reaching 100. So people is watching. So I really hope this meeting is a groundbreak for Brazil. And I really feel honored by the Esper, Khalil, and Rizu coming. When I was talking to Fernando Reis, which is our prorector of science, and thank you for all the support, Fernando. He said, well, you are bringing Messi, Cristiano Ronaldo, and Neymar of clinical science in Brazil. So thank you so much. We feel much appreciated. Thanks all our international speaker. We really brought a constellation. We had a great time, and I learned a lot. And I took so many lessons that we are going to keep up and make the necessary boosters. Thank you.
Thank you.